The smell of burning canvas and oil paint drifted through my bedroom window like a declaration of war. I didn't need to look outside to know what Marcus was doing. The crackling of the fire, the smoke curling up into the October evening, and his drunken laughter told me everything. He was burning my father's paintings. Garbage art from your dead dad. Marcus shouted loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Taking up space in my garage for 3 years. Should have done this the day I moved in. I stayed at my desk, calmly finishing the email to my insurance company. The timestamp would be important later. 7:47 p.m. October 15th. Fire reported. Claim initiated. Evidence attached. Through the window, I could see Mom standing by the back door, arms crossed, watching her husband of 18 months destroy the last physical pieces of my father. She wasn't stopping him. She never did. "Elena," Marcus called to her. "Bring me another beer. We're having a bonfire. Burning all this worthless crap your ex-husband left behind." My father, David Morrow, had been dead for 3 years. Heart attack at 45 while painting in his studio. He'd been an artist his whole life. Not famous, not successful by conventional standards, but dedicated to his craft. The 23 paintings in our garage were all I had left of him. Or rather, they had been in the garage until this afternoon when I carefully photographed each one, documenting their condition, signature, and the small authentication marks that most people wouldn't notice. The paintings Marcus was now burning with such glee. My phone buzzed. A text from Garrett Knox, the insurance investigator I'd been working with. "On my way. ETA 20 minutes. Have fire department on standby. Do not attempt to stop the destruction." I texted back. "He's already started. At least 6 paintings so far." "Perfect. Document everything." I pulled out my phone and started recording through the window. Marcus had built quite the bonfire in our backyard fire pit, feeding it with what he thought was worthless canvas and wood. Mom had brought him his beer and was now sitting in a lawn chair, scrolling through her phone while her husband destroyed my inheritance. "Jessica," Marcus yelled up at my window. "Get down here and watch. This is what happens to garbage in the Thompson house." Thompson, his last name, which he'd insisted Mom take when they married. He'd wanted me to take it too, but I'd refused. I was Jessica Morrow, daughter of David Morrow, and no amount of bullying would change that. I didn't respond to his taunting. Instead, I continued recording as he threw another canvas onto the fire. That one hurt to watch. It was the landscape of Monterey Bay that Dad had painted on my 13th birthday. We'd spent the whole day at the beach, and he captured the light on the water perfectly. 200 paintings, Marcus slurred, though it was only 23. 200 pieces of amateur trash. Your dad couldn't sell a painting to save his life. He wasn't wrong about the selling part. Dad had never sold a single painting while he was alive. He'd worked as a graphic designer to pay the bills and painted for the love of it. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody except me and a very specific appraiser in San Francisco knew, was that my father had been someone else entirely. The truth had come to me slowly through a series of discoveries after his death. First, it was the way certain art collectors reacted when they saw his work at the estate sale I tried to organize. The way they'd exchange glances and quickly leave. Then it was the encrypted files on his computer that took me 2 years to crack. Finally, it was the letter from his friend in London that arrived 6 months ago. "Your father was the most brilliant artist of his generation," the letter had said. That he chose anonymity over fame was both his greatest gift to the art world and his greatest curse. Guard his remaining works carefully. They are worth more than you know. The letter was signed simply RL. It had taken me 3 months to figure out that RL was Robert Langley, one of Banksy's early collaborators and authenticators. You see, my father wasn't just David Morrow, failed artist and weekend painter. He was also Moreau, the mysterious street artist whose works had appeared in major cities throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. The same Moreau whose authenticated pieces now sold for millions at auction. The same Moreau who had disappeared completely in 2008, the year I was born, and my father decided that being a dad was more important than being famous. "Jessica, you pathetic little mouse," Marcus shouted. "Your dad was a nobody, a nothing, just like you." I kept recording. The insurance company would want to hear that. Character evidence, they called it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was the appraiser, Dr. Catherine Vessels. confirming authentication certificates were filed with Lloyd's of London last month. Each painting insured for average market value of authenticated Moreau works. Total coverage, $4.2 million. I smiled despite the smoke now filling my room. Marcus had no idea what he was doing. More importantly, he had no idea what I'd done. Last month, after finally getting the DNA authentication on Dad's paint samples that proved he was Moreau, I'd done 3 things. First, I'd had each painting professionally photographed and authenticated. Second, I'd insured them for their full value. Third, I'd waited. I knew Marcus would eventually destroy them. He'd been threatening to for months, ever since he'd moved in and decided that everything about my father's existence offended him. The paintings in the garage, the photos on the walls, even the wind chimes Dad had made. Marcus wanted it all gone. Mom had slowly given in to most of his demands. The photos came down. The wind chimes disappeared. But the paintings had remained in the garage, protected by my threats to call the police if he touched them. I was 17 then, and he backed off. Now I was 18, legal adult, owner of my father's estate, and fully capable of making my own insurance claims. Through the window, I watched Marcus throw another painting onto the fire. The oils in the paint created green and blue flames that danced against the evening sky. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so calculated. 15 minutes out, Garrett texted, "Local PD is with me." The police? That was a bonus I hadn't expected, but it made sense. $4 million in property damage wasn't just an insurance claim, it was a felony. Marcus had moved on to the larger canvases now, the ones that barely fit in the fire pit. He was having to break them apart first, snapping the frames with his boots and tearing the canvas. Mom had stopped watching, gone inside to make dinner as if this was just another Tuesday night. "Hey Thompson," our neighbor, Mr. Curtis, called over the fence. "That smoke is getting pretty thick." "Mind your own business, old man," Marcus shouted back. "This is my property. I'll burn whatever I want." Actually, it wasn't his property. The house was still in my mother's name alone, a detail from the prenup she'd insisted on after her experience with my father's death and estate complications. Marcus had no legal claim to the house or anything in it, including the paintings he was destroying. My phone rang. It was Garrett. "Jessica, I'm 5 minutes out. Can you confirm the subject is still actively destroying the paintings?" "Yes," I said, watching Marcus wrestle with a particularly large canvas. "He's burned approximately 15 of the 23 paintings so far." "And you have documentation of your ownership?" "Everything. The will, the estate transfer, the authentication certificates, the insurance policies. It's all in a cloud folder I shared with you." "Excellent. And he was informed these paintings belong to you?" "Multiple times in writing. The last email was 3 days ago." There was a pause. "Jessica, I have to ask, why didn't you move them somewhere safe if you knew he might do this?" "Where would I move them? I'm 18, living at home, no money for storage units. My mom sided with him. I had nowhere safe to put them." I paused, then added the part that would matter in court. "Besides, he said if I moved them, he'd kick me out. I have that in text messages too." "Smart girl. Sit tight. This is about to get very interesting." I watched Marcus throw the last painting onto the fire. 23 works by one of the most important street artists of the modern era, reduced to ash and smoke. If they'd been real. The paintings Marcus was burning were forgeries. But forgeries, I painted them myself over the last month, copying my father's style as best I could. The real paintings were in a climate-controlled storage unit in San Francisco, moved there piece by piece over the last 6 weeks. The authentication process had required the originals, but the insurance photos had been carefully taken to be ambiguous about certain details. Marcus was destroying evidence of his own crime, not realizing the evidence was fake and the crime was still real. The doorbell rang at 8:23 p.m. I heard Mom's surprised voice, then footsteps on the stairs. My bedroom door opened and she stood there, face pale. "Jessica, there are police officers here, and someone from an insurance company. They want to talk to Marcus." I stood up slowly, tucking my phone with all its recorded evidence into my pocket. They should probably talk to him before he destroys any more of my property. "Your property? Those were just your father's old paintings." "Those were original Moreau works, Mom. Dad was Moreau, the street artist, The one whose painting sold for $6 million at Sotheby's last year. The color drained from her face completely. That's impossible. I have the authentication papers. Had them for a month now. I tried to tell you, but you said I was being dramatic about Dad's hobby. She sank against the doorframe. How much? How much were they worth? The collection? About $4.2 million. Each painting was insured for its current market value. I walked past her, then paused. By the way, destruction of property valued over $100,000 is a felony in California. Just thought you should know before you go back downstairs. I could hear Marcus's voice from the backyard, loud and aggressive, demanding to know why police were at his house. Garrett's calm response carried through the window. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the fire and explain why you're destroying artwork valued at several $million. Millions? Marcus laughed. That garbage. It's worthless trash from my stepdaughter's dead father. Sir, I have authentication certificates here showing these paintings are original works by the artist Moreau, authenticated last month by the Langley Foundation and insured by Lloyd's of London. The owner, Jessica Morrow, filed a claim 45 minutes ago stating you were destroying them without permission. The silence that followed was beautiful. I made my way downstairs and out to the backyard, where Marcus stood frozen between the dying fire and 3 police officers. Garrett, a tall man in an expensive suit, was photographing the scene with professional equipment. Miss Morrow. He turned to me. Can you confirm these ashes are the remains of your father's paintings? Yes, I said clearly. Marcus Thompson destroyed all 23 paintings that were stored in the garage. I have video of him doing it, despite my repeated requests for him to stop. Marcus finally found his voice. This is bullshit. There's no way those paintings were worth millions. Her father was a nobody. Garrett pulled out his tablet, showing a news article from last year. The headline read, Anonymous Morrow painting sells for record $6 million at auction. David Morrow was Moreau, Garrett explained patiently. His daughter has provided DNA evidence from paint samples, handwriting analysis, and detailed provenance tracking. The authentication is irrefutable, and you, Mr. Thompson, have just destroyed $4 million worth of irreplaceable artwork. But she never, Elena. Marcus turned to my mother, who had come outside. Tell them those paintings were worthless. Mom looked at me, then at the police, then at the man she'd married. I didn't know. Jessica tried to tell me they were important, but I didn't listen. One of the officers stepped forward. Marcus Thompson, you're under arrest for felony destruction of property, grand theft, and vandalism. You have the right to remain silent. As they handcuffed him, Marcus kept screaming that it was his house, his rules, that I was lying, that this was all a setup. Technically, he was right about the last part. It was a setup, just not the way he thought. Garrett approached me as they led Marcus away. The insurance claim will be processed within 30 days. Given the clear documentation and the perpetrator's confession on video, I don't anticipate any issues with payment. Thank you, I said quietly. He studied me for a moment. You know, in 15 years of investigating insurance fraud, I've never seen someone document their own loss so thoroughly, almost like you knew this was going to happen. Marcus has been threatening to destroy those paintings for months. I had to be prepared. And moving them to a secure location never occurred to you. I met his eyes steadily. Where would a broke 18-year-old move 23 large paintings? I did the best I could with what I had. He nodded slowly. The storage unit in San Francisco. The one you visited 6 times in the last 2 months. My heart stopped. The one that happens to be climate controlled, perfect for storing artwork. He pulled out a different tablet, showing security footage of me carrying large wrapped canvases into a storage facility. The one registered under your grandmother's maiden name. I said nothing. Garrett put the tablet away and smiled. Fortunately, that storage unit isn't relevant to this case. These paintings, he gestured to the smoking fire pit, were destroyed. That's what I saw. That's what the video evidence shows. That's what Mr. Thompson confessed to doing. Whether those paintings were originals or copies, well, that would be almost impossible to prove now that they're ash. He handed me his business card. The claim will be processed for the full amount, $4.2 million. I suggest you use it wisely, perhaps to protect any other artwork you might have inherited. As he walked away, Mom stood beside me, staring at the dying fire. Jessica, tell me the truth. Were those the real paintings? I watched the last of the canvas turn to ash. Does it matter? Marcus believed they were real when he destroyed them. He intended to destroy millions of dollars of my property to hurt me. The fact that I was smart enough to protect my real inheritance doesn't change his crime. She was quiet for a long moment. Your father would be proud. He always said you were smarter than all of us combined. He also said to never let anyone burn your dreams. I turned to go inside. I need to call a lawyer about getting Marcus banned from the house. And Mom, you might want to call one about that prenup. I don't think destroying your stepdaughter's multi-million-dollar inheritance is going to look good in divorce court. 3 months later, I stood in a gallery in New York, watching people bid on one of my father's paintings. Well, Moreau's paintings. The world knew who he was now, and the 23 paintings I'd discovered in a storage unit after the insurance settlement made international news. The paintings sold for $8 million. Marcus was serving 3 years in prison. Mom had divorced him and was in therapy, finally dealing with the grief of losing my father that she tried to bury with a terrible rebound marriage. And me? I was using the insurance money to build an art school in my father's name. A place where young artists could learn that sometimes the best art isn't about fame or money. It's about creating something worth protecting, even if that means letting people think it's garbage until the moment they realize it's gold. Dad would have loved the irony. His paintings were finally worth millions, but only because everyone thought they'd been destroyed. The real art, he would have said, was in the deception itself. I kept one painting for myself, the Monterey Bay landscape. It hangs in my apartment now, a reminder that sometimes you have to let people burn fake dreams to protect the real ones. And sometimes, the best revenge is letting someone destroy exactly what they think they're destroying, while the truth sits safely in a storage unit in San Francisco, waiting for its moment to shine.
The most dangerous lies aren't the ones people tell you. They're the ones you tell yourself. For 5 years, my husband Seamus and I had been telling ourselves the same one. Next month will be different. Next month, the test will be positive. My name is Danielle. I was 33, and my world had shrunk to the size of a 2-week wait. Seamus, at 36, had been my rock through it all. He held my hand through every negative test, every failed IVF cycle, and every quiet, hollow drive home from the fertility clinic. He'd wrap his arms around me and whisper, "We're a team, Danny. We'll get through this." I believed him. I wanted to believe him more than anything. Our savings were gone, and my hope was a flickering candle in a hurricane. We were sitting at our kitchen table, staring at yet another mountain of medical bills, when my younger sister Zaylee walked in. She was 29, all bright-eyed energy and effortless confidence. Everything I felt I'd lost. She set a Tupperware container of cookies on the table, a peace offering for interrupting the gloom. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. She looked from me to Seamus, her expression a careful performance of empathy. "I hate seeing you two go through this. It's not fair." I managed a weak smile. "It is what it is, Zay." "No," she insisted, leaning forward. "It doesn't have to be. I want to help, really help." She took a deep breath. "Let me be your surrogate." The air left my lungs. Seamus looked up, his eyes wide. I stared at my sister, searching for the catch. Zaylee had never been the selfless type. Her world revolved around her own reflection, her own needs, but the look on her face was one of pure, earnest love. Or so I told myself. "Zaylee, that's an incredible thing to offer," Seamus said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "You deserve to be a mom, Danny. I can give you that." And just like that, the flickering candle of my hope roared back into a bonfire. We cried, we hugged, and for the first time in years, the future felt bright. We used my egg and donor sperm, a decision we'd made after discovering Seamus had his own fertility issues he'd never disclosed. He'd been devastated, and I'd assured him it didn't matter. We were a team. The medical appointments started again, but this time they were filled with a giddy excitement. Zaylee was a champ through the hormone shots and the transfer procedure. When the doctor called with the news that she was pregnant, we celebrated like we'd won the lottery. Seamus bought her a ridiculously expensive thank you bracelet and toasted to Aunt Zaylee, the family hero. But as the weeks turned into months, a subtle chill crept into our home. Seamus started working late more often. When he was home, he was distant, his phone always angled away from me. He'd stop talking when I entered a room or end a call with a clipped, "I'll call you back." When I asked who it was, he'd just say, "Work." He still went to every appointment, but his attention was always on Zaylee. He'd rub her back, fetch her water, and hang on her every word about the baby's kicks. I told myself it was normal. He was just grateful, protective of the woman carrying our child. He was being a good brother-in-law. The lie was getting harder to swallow. The moment it all cracked was on a Sunday afternoon. Zaylee was over, her belly a perfect round globe under her maternity dress. I was in the kitchen making tea when I looked into the living room. Seamus was standing behind the armchair where Zaylee was sitting, his hand resting on her shoulder. She tilted her head back and looked up at him. It wasn't a look of gratitude. It wasn't familial. It was a silent, secret conversation. A shared glance of such profound intimacy, of a deep and certain ownership that it made me feel like a stranger in my own home. It lasted only a second, but it was long enough to burn away every lie I had ever told myself. They weren't just building a family with me. They were building one without me. That single glance was a key turning a lock inside me. The part of my heart that had been filled with naive hope went cold and hard, replaced by a chilling clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't confront them. I went to my laptop that night and opened a new password-protected document. The first entry was simple. Sunday, 4:15 p.m. The look in the living room. From that day on, I became an archivist of my own betrayal. I documented everything. The late-night texts that made Seamus flinch when they came in, the hushed phone calls he'd taken in the garage claiming they were with his boss, the receipts I found in his coat pocket for dinners for two at places I'd never been, on nights he was supposedly working late. Zaylee would text me pictures of her growing belly with captions like, "Your little miracle is kicking." And minutes later, Seamus's phone would buzz with a message from her that he'd quickly hide. I took screenshots over his shoulder when he was distracted, my hands steady, my heart pounding a slow, rhythmic drumbeat of rage. 2 weeks after that glance, I made an appointment with a family law attorney named Yolanda Lopez. I found her through a discreet online search, her firm specializing in complex surrogacy and custody agreements. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and an even sharper suit, and she didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You're here about your surrogacy agreement," she stated, looking at the file I'd sent ahead. "You said you wanted to review your protections." "That's right," I said, my voice even. I didn't tell her my husband was sleeping with my sister. I didn't need to. I just needed to be prepared. "I want to make sure there are no ambiguities. I am the sole intended parent. My sister is the gestational carrier. That's it." Yolanda nodded, her expression unreadable. "And the father?" This was the moment. The memory felt so vivid. It was like stepping back in time. It was from 5 months ago, just before the embryo transfer. I'd been at the clinic to sign the final consent forms. Seamus was supposed to meet me, but he'd called at the last minute saying he was stuck in traffic. "Just sign for me, Danny," he'd said. "You know what we want." But something had felt off for weeks even then. A subtle shift I couldn't name. A shared joke between him and Zaylee I wasn't in on. A lingering touch on her arm that felt less like a brother-in-law and more like something else. So, sitting in that sterile office, I'd asked the coordinator a question. "Can I review the donor profile one last time?" She'd pulled up the file for the donor we had chosen together, and then I saw it, a small note in the administrative section. Profile viewed by S. Dawson, 3:20 p.m., Tuesday. He hadn't been with me on Tuesday. He'd told me he was helping Zaylee move a bookcase. My blood ran cold. Why would he be looking at the donor profile without me, unless he was looking for something specific, a resemblance perhaps? In that moment, a plan formed, born of pure instinctual self-preservation. "Actually," I'd said to the coordinator, my voice betraying no emotion, "I've had a change of heart. I'd like to switch to our backup selection. Donor 734. Chase Spencer." Back in Yolanda's office, I took a steadying breath. "The sperm is from an anonymous donor," I told her. "Seamus has no biological connection to the child." Yolanda's pen stopped moving. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than professionalism in her eyes. It was respect. "Good," she said. "That simplifies things." We spent the next hour drafting an ironclad surrogacy contract that a team of legal scholars would have trouble piercing. It named me as the sole legal parent with absolute custodial rights from the moment of birth. It stipulated that Seamus would have no legal standing until and unless I consented to a step-parent adoption after the baby was born. He signed it without reading the fine print, too caught up in the performance of the doting husband. The final months of the pregnancy were an exercise in restraint. I played the part of the excited, expectant mother, while Seamus and Zaylee played their roles as hero and grateful husband. They thought they were so clever. The proof I needed came a week before Zaylee's due date. I came home early from a meeting and went into our home office to print a document, and there it was, on the corner of the desk, next to Seamus's keyboard. A coffee cup stained with a familiar shade of bright, garish pink lipstick. It was Fuchsia Flash, Zaylee's signature color. She'd been here, in our office, in our home, leaving her mark on my life like she owned it. I picked up the cup, my fingers tracing the waxy residue. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They thought I was blind. They had no idea I could see everything. The call came at 2 a.m. It was Seamus, his voice a frantic whisper. Her water broke. "We're heading to the hospital now." "I'll meet you there," I said, my own voice a perfect imitation of a nervous, excited mother-to-be. I hung up, and for a moment I just sat on the edge of the bed in the silent, dark house. My go-bag was already by the door. Inside, alongside a change of clothes and snacks, was a folder containing a copy of the surrogacy agreement and the hospital birth plan, which legally designated me as the primary decision maker and the only person, besides medical staff, allowed with the baby. I was ready. At the hospital, the air was thick with antiseptic and anticipation. I found them in the labor and delivery room. Zaylee was in the bed, breathing through a contraction, her face pale with effort. Seamus was by her side, holding her hand, whispering encouragement. He glanced up when I walked in, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he masked it with a strained smile. "Danny, you made it." He didn't get up. He didn't hug me. He stayed glued to Zaylee's side. I pulled up a chair on the other side of the bed and tried to look like I belonged there. "How are you doing, Zay?" I asked. She grunted a response, squeezing Seamus's hand. The hours that followed were a masterclass in being invisible. Nurses came and went, directing their questions to Zaylee and Seamus. He was the one rubbing her back, fetching her ice chips, the picture of a devoted partner. I was just there, a spectator at the birth of my own child. I kept my composure, a calm island in their churning sea of drama, my mind focused on the finish line. After 14 hours of labor, my daughter was born. She came into the world with a healthy, piercing cry, and for a single unguarded moment, my carefully constructed walls crumbled. Tears streamed down my face as the doctor announced, "It's a girl." They placed her on Zaylee's chest, and I saw her, my baby, for the first time. She was perfect. Seamus cut the cord, his hands trembling. He was beaming, a proud father. A nurse gently took the baby to be cleaned and weighed. When she brought her back, swaddled in a pink and white striped blanket, she looked at me. "Mom, would you like to hold her?" Before I could even stand, Seamus stepped in front of me. "I'll take her," he said, his voice firm. He took the baby from the nurse and cradled her against his chest. He didn't look at me. He walked over to Zaylee's side and looked down at our daughter with an expression of pure, possessive adoration. "She's ours, Zay," he murmured, his voice thick. "We did it." The nurse shot me a confused look, but I just gave a small, tight smile. I let him have his moment. I knew it wouldn't last. Later that night, after Zaylee had been moved to a private recovery room, I tried to go into the small nursery alcove attached to it. My daughter was sleeping peacefully in a bassinet. As I reached for the handle, Seamus's body blocked the doorway. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice low and cold. "I want to see my daughter," I said, keeping my tone even. He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Your daughter, you did your part. You can go now." Zaylee's voice, smug and victorious, came from the bed. "He's right, Danielle. You should leave and let the real family begin." I stared at them, the two people I had trusted most in the world. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a physical thing, standing in the doorway, holding me back from my child. I looked from Seamus's hard, unyielding face to my sister's triumphant smirk. The script I had been rehearsing in my head for months was about to begin. "I'm not going anywhere without my baby," I said. Seamus stepped closer, his charm completely gone, replaced by a chilling cruelty I had only seen glimpses of before. He leaned in, his voice barely a whisper, so the nurses wouldn't hear. "Thanks for the baby," he said, his eyes like chips of ice. "We don't need you anymore." I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him, at the man I had loved, and saw a complete stranger. Then I turned and walked away. The sound of the hospital room door clicking shut behind me was the starting pistol for the rest of my life. My hands were steady on the steering wheel as I drove through the deserted city streets. There were no tears, only a cold, burning resolve that settled deep in my bones. The grief was there, a vast black ocean inside me, but I couldn't let myself drown in it. Not yet. First, I had to fight. I pulled over on a quiet side street and called Yolanda. It was nearly midnight, but I knew she'd be waiting. "Yolanda?" I said when she answered. "It's Danielle." "I know," she replied, her voice all business. "Tell me." "They did it. They told me to leave. They have my daughter. Are you safe?" "Yes." "I'm on my way to your office." Her office was a beacon of light in a dark, empty building. She had a pot of coffee brewing and a stack of files on her conference table. She didn't offer condolences. She offered a strategy. "First things first," she said, sliding a document across the table. "The hospital's birth registration form. Did you sign it?" "This morning, with the records clerk," I confirmed. "I followed your instructions." I signed as the sole legal parent, citing the surrogacy agreement. Seamus's name is nowhere on it. Excellent. And the hospital staff? Did they push back? A little, I admitted. I told them there was a potential records mix-up at the fertility clinic regarding the donor sample and that we were waiting for a confirmatory DNA test before finalizing paternity. It was enough to make them pause. They filed the paperwork with just my name on it for now. It was a calculated lie, designed to create just enough bureaucratic confusion to buy me the time I needed. Yolanda gave a sharp, approving nod. "Perfect. That gives us a clean path. First thing in the morning, we'll be at the courthouse, filing for an ex parte emergency custody order. We'll present the surrogacy contract and the birth registration. A judge will see that a legal mother is being denied access to her newborn infant. They'll grant it without a hearing. And a restraining order? I asked, the words tasting like ash. A temporary one, yes, against both Seamus and Zaylee. It will require them to stay 100 yards away from you and the baby. She paused, her gaze intense. Which brings us to the next problem. Where are they now? They'll be discharged tomorrow morning. They'll go to the house. Our house. And the house, Yolanda said, leaning forward. Let's talk about the house. Whose name is on the deed? A small, cold smile touched my lips for the first time that night. Mine, I said. Only mine. Yolanda raised an eyebrow. It was my grandmother's house, I explained. It was left to me in her will, and I owned it free and clear 2 years before I married Seamus. He wanted his name on the title, of course. He said it would make him feel like a true partner. The memory of his charming, persuasive arguments was sickening now. I told him my lawyer advised against it. Instead, he put his savings into renovating the kitchen and building the deck. He called it his investment in our future. He thought he was being clever, marking his territory. Yolanda's professional mask finally slipped, and a slow, predatory grin spread across her face. "Oh, Mr. Dawson," she murmured, "you have no idea what's coming." We worked for another hour, finalizing the affidavits and preparing the documents. When I finally left her office, the first hints of dawn were streaking the sky. I drove not to an empty house, but to my friend Juliana's place a few blocks away. She opened the door without a word and just wrapped me in a hug. I didn't cry, but I let myself lean on her for a moment, gathering my strength for the battle ahead. As I lay on her spare bed, staring at the ceiling, the full weight of the situation settled on me. Seamus and Zaylee were at the hospital, basking in the glow of their victory, holding my baby. Tomorrow, they would take her home to my house, planning to start their perfect new life in the nursery I had designed, in the rooms I had painted. They believed they had taken everything from me. They were wrong. They weren't taking shelter in their new home. They were squatting on my battlefield, and I was coming to reclaim it. The next morning, the sun was bright and merciless. I met Yolanda at the courthouse at 8 a.m. sharp. By 9:15, we had the emergency custody order and the temporary restraining order, both signed and stamped by a judge. By 10:30, we were parked down the street from my house, waiting for the local sheriff's deputy Yolanda had arranged to meet us. Officer Clay Brown was a tall, stoic man in his 40s, with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. He reviewed the paperwork, his expression neutral. "So, to be clear," he said, looking at me, "you are the legal mother, this is your property, and the respondents are your husband and sister, who are currently inside with your infant daughter?" "That's correct, officer," I said, my voice steady. He nodded. "All right, ma'am. Let's go get your baby." We walked up the driveway together, Yolanda on my left, Officer Brown on my right. As we got closer, I saw a locksmith's van parked at the curb. A man was working on my front door. Seamus stood on the porch, arms crossed, overseeing the operation like the king of a castle he didn't own. He saw us first. A smug, dismissive smile played on his lips. "Danielle, I told you we were done. You need to leave." "Actually, Seamus, you do," Yolanda said, stepping forward. That's when he noticed Officer Brown. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a flash of confusion, then anger. "What is this? You can't be serious. You're harassing us." By now, a few of my neighbors were starting to notice the commotion. Juliana was on her porch across the street, phone in hand. Mr. Henderson next door had stopped watering his petunias and was watching with open curiosity. Officer Brown ignored Seamus and addressed me. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" "Yes, it is," I said clearly. He then turned to Seamus. "Sir, I have a court order here for you to vacate the premises immediately." He handed a thick envelope to Seamus, whose face went pale as he read the first page. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "This is my house. I live here." "The deed says otherwise," Yolanda said coolly. "It's in Danielle's name, solely." Just then, the front door opened, and Zaylee appeared, holding my baby. She was wearing one of my silk robes. The sight of it sent a hot spike of rage through me, but I kept my face a mask of calm. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Seamus, who are these people?" "And I have another order for you, Ms. Kennedy," Officer Brown said, handing her a second envelope. "And this one is for both of you. It's an emergency custody order. The child belongs to Ms. Dawson. You are to hand her over now." Zaylee clutched the baby tighter, her eyes wide with disbelief and panic. "No, she's my baby." "I carried her. I gave birth to her." "You were a gestational carrier, Zaylee," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "That was the agreement you signed." "This is insane," Seamus roared, throwing the papers onto the lawn. "She's my daughter. I'm the father." He jabbed a finger at me. "Tell them, Danielle. Tell them I'm the father." This was the moment I had been waiting for, the culmination of months of silent planning. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single folded document. I walked right up to him and handed it to him. "You wanted a paternity test," I said, my voice low and clear. "There's no need. You're not the father, Seamus." He unfolded the paper. It was a copy of the donor selection form from the fertility clinic, the one with donor NUP734, Chase Spencer, clearly listed, signed and dated by me. His face crumpled as the truth hit him. The biological connection he thought gave him ownership, the one thing he was counting on, had never existed. Zaylee started to cry, a loud theatrical wail. "You can't do this. It's not fair." Officer Brown stepped forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Mom, you have two choices. You can hand the baby to her mother peacefully, or I can place you under arrest for custodial interference. It's up to you." Defeated, Zaylee slowly, reluctantly held the baby out. I stepped forward and took my daughter into my arms for the first time since she was born. She was so small, so warm. I held her close, breathing in her scent, and the black ocean of grief inside me finally began to recede. Seamus was just staring at me, his face a mixture of shock and hatred. He couldn't comprehend how he had lost so completely. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper only he could hear. "You thought I was weak. Turns out I was preparing for war." I didn't realize Juliana had been recording the entire exchange until her video hit the local community Facebook group that afternoon. Titled "Neighbor Reclaims Home and Baby from Cheating Husband and Sister," it spread like wildfire. By evening, it had been picked up by regional news blogs. Every detail was there for the world to see: Seamus's arrogant blustering, Zaylee's hysterical cries, and my quiet, unshakable composure as I took back my daughter. The court documents, which Seamus had thrown on the lawn, were briefly visible, their official headings lending undeniable credibility to the scene. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Zaylee worked as a receptionist at a popular local spa, a job she got because of her looks and bubbly personality. Her boss, a woman who valued discretion and a drama-free workplace, fired her the next morning. Her carefully curated social media presence was flooded with comments calling her a homewrecker and a monster. Friends she'd known for years suddenly stopped answering her calls. My phone, on the other hand, wouldn't stop ringing. It was our mother. "Danielle, what is going on?" she demanded, her voice tight with a familiar, weary disapproval. Zaylee is a mess. She said you stole her baby and threw her out of your house. I rocked my daughter, whose name I had decided would be Grace, and listened to the old, tired story of my family. Zaylee, the beautiful, impulsive one who could do no wrong. Me, the quiet, responsible one, expected to clean up her messes. She's not her baby, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She was my surrogate, and it's my house. She and Seamus were having an affair and planned to cut me out of my own child's life. It's all in the video. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. An affair? She finally whispered. Oh, Zaylee, what has she done? The disappointment in her voice was a familiar wound. She'd always made excuses for Zaylee, blaming her behavior on her free spirit, while my own achievements were simply expected. This, it seemed, was a line even she couldn't excuse. 2 days later, a large moving truck and a portable storage bin arrived at the curb. Under the supervision of Officer Brown, Seamus was permitted exactly 2 hours to remove his personal belongings from my property. I watched from the living room window, Grace sleeping soundly in her bassinet beside me. He moved with a furious, jerky energy, throwing his clothes into boxes, his face a thundercloud of rage. He couldn't even look at the house. Zaylee was there too. She sat on the curb, her face puffy from crying, looking lost and small. When the movers brought out the last of Seamus's things, he stormed over to her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language was venomous. He was yelling, jabbing his finger at her. She was crying, shaking her head. The perfect couple, the real family, was already imploding under the weight of their own deceit. He loaded the last box into his car, got in, and drove away without a backward glance, leaving her alone on the sidewalk. A few minutes later, Zaylee walked slowly up to the front door and rang the bell. I opened it just enough to see her. Can I just see her one last time? She pleaded, her voice raw. Please, Danny. I looked at my sister, at the wreckage she had made of our lives, and felt a profound and hollow sadness. I stepped back, and she came into the entryway. I gestured to the bassinet. She knelt beside it, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs as she looked down at the baby she had intended to steal. She reached out a trembling hand but didn't touch her. After a long moment, she stood up, wiped her eyes, and walked out without another word. As I closed the door, I felt no triumph, only the quiet, heavy cost of justice. The next day, Yolanda called. The district attorney's office has seen the video and reviewed the police report, she said. They also have the text messages and emails you forwarded me, the ones where Seamus and Zaylee discuss their plan to claim paternity and raise the child as their own. I remembered compiling them, my hands shaking not with fear, but with a cold, methodical purpose. They believe they have a strong case, Yolanda continued. They're asking if you want to press criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. Zaylee could also face a perjury charge for falsifying medical intake forms where she swore she had no conflicts that would impact the surrogacy. I looked over at Grace, who was cooing in her swing. Pressing charges meant more court dates, more public spectacle, more time and energy devoted to them, but it also meant a final, undeniable consequence for what they had done. Yes, I said, I do. The legal proceedings moved with a speed that surprised even Yolanda. The public nature of the case, fueled by the viral video, put a spotlight on the court that discouraged any delays. Seamus, desperate to reclaim some semblance of control, filed an appeal against the emergency custody order. It was his last, pathetic attempt to assert a right he never had. We sat in a sterile courtroom, smaller and less dramatic than the ones on television. I held Grace, who was bundled against my chest in a carrier, a silent, unknowing participant in the fight for her future. Seamus sat at the opposing table, his new lawyer looking increasingly frustrated. "Your Honor," his lawyer argued, "Mr. Dawson was under the impression for the entire duration of the pregnancy that he was the biological father. He has been a victim of deception." Yolanda stood, calm and unflappable. "Your Honor, Mr. Dawson's impressions are irrelevant. The legally binding surrogacy contract which he signed is crystal clear. It explicitly states that the child would be conceived using an anonymous donor and that Danielle Kennedy Dawson is the sole intended parent. His signature is on page 12. The judge, a stern woman with no patience for theatrics, looked over her glasses at Seamus. "Mr. Dawson, did you read the contract before you signed it?" He shifted in his seat. I trusted my wife." "So you did not read it," the judge stated flatly. "Appeal denied. The emergency custody order is made permanent. Ms. Dawson has sole legal and physical custody." The gavel fell with a sharp crack, a definitive end to his claim. Seamus's face went rigid with fury. It was a satisfying but hollow victory. The real battle was the criminal case. The prosecution presented its evidence with methodical precision. They displayed the emails I had saved, projected onto a large screen for the court to see. There it was, in black and white. Seamus and Zaley discussing how they would tell me to leave after the birth, how they'd file for divorce, how he would immediately claim paternity. "She'll be too heartbroken to fight." One of Seamus's emails read, "By the time she figures out what to do, we'll be established as a family." A collective murmur went through the courtroom. The most damning evidence came when Zaley was called to the stand. Facing the possibility of a perjury conviction, her lawyer had clearly advised her to cooperate. She looked thin and exhausted, a pale imitation of the vibrant woman she once was. "Ms. Kennedy," the prosecutor began gently, "when you filled out the medical and psychological evaluation forms for the surrogacy, were you asked if you had any personal relationships that could create a conflict of interest?" Zaley nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Yes." "And what did you answer?" "I answered no," she whispered. "Was that answer truthful?" She hesitated, her shoulders trembling. "No." "At the time you filled out those forms, were you engaged in a romantic relationship with your sister's husband, Seamus Dawson?" Tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she choked out. "We were." The final piece of the puzzle was Chase Spencer. He was a quiet, unassuming architect from the next state over, the anonymous donor, Chakgur 734. He had been subpoenaed to testify, and his presence in the courtroom was the final, irrefutable nail in Seamus's coffin. He simply confirmed his donation records with the fertility clinic, his timeline, and the fact that he had never met me, Seamus, or Zaley. He was a stranger, a biological fact that dismantled Seamus's entire narrative of betrayal and victimhood. He hadn't been deceived, he had been the deceiver, and he had been outplayed. When it was over, the verdict was swift. Guilty on all counts. I walked out of the courthouse and onto the sun-drenched steps, holding Grace tightly. The air felt clean and new. Behind me, I could hear Seamus and Zaley's voices, no longer hushed whispers of conspiracy, but loud, ugly shouts of blame. "This is your fault," he snarled at her. "If you had just kept your mouth shut." "My fault?" she shrieked back. "You were the one who was supposed to have a plan. You said she would just roll over and give up." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see their pathetic, self-inflicted implosion. I just adjusted Grace in her carrier, felt the warmth of her small body against mine, and walked down the steps. She was legally, biologically, and emotionally mine. The war was over. I had won. The weeks following the trial were quiet. The noise of lawyers and court dates faded, replaced by the gentle rhythms of a newborn. Grace's gurgles and sighs filled the rooms of my house, chasing out the last of the ghosts. I was stronger, but the victory didn't feel like a celebration. Justice is a cold comfort. It cauterizes a wound, but doesn't erase the scar. It simply lays the pain to rest, allowing something new to grow in its place. Yolanda came over one afternoon, not as a lawyer, but as a friend. She brought a bottle of wine and a lasagna, setting them on the kitchen counter as I rocked Grace. "I heard from the prosecutor," she said, her tone gentle. Zaylee took a plea bargain, no jail time. 200 hours of community service and court-mandated counseling for a year. I nodded, unsurprised. "And Seamus?" "He's appealing the conviction, of course. He'll lose, but he's dragging it out, trying to inflict one last pound of flesh. It won't work." She paused, watching me. "Are you okay with that? About Zaylee?" I thought about my sister, about the tangled mess of jealousy and insecurity that had defined our relationship since childhood. "Jail wouldn't have fixed what's broken in her," I said. "Maybe counseling will. It's more than she deserves and less than I hoped for, but it's an ending. I'll take it." Later that evening, after I'd put Grace to bed, I found myself scrolling online. A friend had sent me a link with the message, "Thought you might want to see this." It was a new video, shot on a cell phone. The quality was shaky, but the audio was perfectly clear. It was from the day Seamus had been forced to move his things out of my house. Someone from across the street had filmed his final explosive rant as he stood by the storage bin. "She thinks she's so smart," he was shouting to no one in particular, his face red and contorted with rage. "She'll be sorry. I built that deck. I put in that kitchen. That's my sweat in that house." His words were a pathetic monument to his own entitlement. The video had made the rounds in our local business community, where Seamus had once been a well-regarded project manager. His charm had been his greatest asset, but the video revealed the ugly truth beneath it. No one wanted to hire a man who screamed on a suburban street about how he felt entitled to a woman's property because he'd done some renovations. He was unemployable, a pariah. The last I'd heard, Zaylee had left him and moved back in with our estranged mother, their shared failure a bitter pill for them both to swallow. I closed the laptop. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a profound sense of closure. He hadn't destroyed me. He had destroyed himself. I walked over to the nursery and stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. The first light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. I could see the deck he was so proud of, the one where he and Zaylee had shared their secret glances. I'd have it torn down next spring and plant a garden instead. Grace stirred in her crib, making a soft, sleepy sound. I leaned over and picked her up, her tiny body warm and solid in my arms. She smelled of milk and innocence. I held her close, her head resting against my shoulder, and watched the sunrise. The world they had tried to burn down was gone, and in its place was this, just this. Quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. "We're a real family now," I whispered, my lips against her soft hair. "On my terms." They tried to erase me, but I rewrote the story.
It was supposed to be a good day. One of those rare, perfect days you file away to remember when things get hard. My fiancée Kyla and I had decided to share our news at my parents' Sunday dinner, a weekly ritual of dry roast chicken and simmering resentment. My name is Trinity, I'm 29, and for my entire life I've been the understudy in a play starring my older sister Stella. Stella, who is 32, arrived a half-hour late, flashing a diamond that could probably be seen from space. She didn't even wait for everyone to sit down. "Morgan proposed," she announced, thrusting her hand out. My mother Reagan shrieked with a sound I hadn't heard since Stella was crowned prom queen. My father Bryant stood up and hugged her, his face beaming. "That's my girl," he said, his voice thick with pride. The next 20 minutes were a blur of champagne, frantic calls to relatives, and my mother already scrolling through wedding venues on her phone. I caught Kyler's eye across the room. He gave me a small, encouraging nod. He's a good man, Kyler. At 31, he has a quiet strength that anchors me. He builds custom furniture, and his hands, though often covered in sawdust, are the gentlest I've ever known. I waited for a lull, a tiny pocket of silence, and cleared my throat. We actually have some news too, I said, my voice feeling small in the cavernous room. I held up my own hand where the simple, elegant ring Kyler had designed himself sat on my finger. Kyler and I are engaged. The reaction was different. My mother's smile tightened. "Oh," she said. "Well, congratulations. How nice." My father clapped Kyler on the shoulder. "Good for you, son. Welcome to the family." It was the same tone he used when I got a B+ on a report card while Stella had gotten an A. Polite, but disappointed. Stella glanced at my ring for a fraction of a second before turning back to our mother. "Mum, I was thinking a spring wedding. Maybe at that chateau out in wine country. We have to book it ASAP." And just like that, I was invisible again. My engagement, my moment, was an inconvenient footnote in the grand production of Stella's life. It was a story I knew by heart. When I was 10, my parents cancelled my small birthday party because it was the same weekend as Stella's regional dance competition. For my high school graduation, they gave me a $100 savings bond. For Stella's, they bought her a car. She went to a private university out of state. I went to the local public college while living at home. The reasoning was always the same. Stella needs the resources to build her future. "You've always been so practical, Trinity. You understand." I didn't understand. I just learned to stop asking. Later, while I was helping clear the table, my mother gushed about Stella's fiancé. "Morgan is just brilliant," she said, loud enough for Kyler to hear from the living room. "He's a senior consultant at a top tech firm. His family has a legacy. This is an investment in Stella's future." She paused, then glanced at Kyler, who was quietly talking to my dad. "Kyler seems like a nice boy." "He's okay, but not very refined, is he? A little rough around the edges." I felt a familiar hot shame creep up my neck. I wanted to scream that Kyler was the most refined man I knew. He valued integrity, honesty, and hard work, not social climbing and empty praise. But I just stacked the plates and said nothing. It was easier that way. It was always easier. As Kyler and I were getting our coats to leave, I went to the kitchen to get a bottle of water for the drive. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard my parents' hushed voices. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. "We'll have to take out a small loan for the venue deposit," my father was saying, his voice strained. "But it's worth it. We have to make a strong impression on Morgan's family." Then my mother's voice, sharp and clinical, cut through the air and straight into my heart. "We'll manage," she said. "Trinity's engagement. That can be low-key." She's used to low-key. The words "she's used to low-key" echoed in my head for weeks. They became the soundtrack to my life as Stella's wedding planning consumed my family like a tidal wave. My mother, Reagan, transformed into a 4-star general commanding an army of one, Stella. They spent their days touring venues, tasting cakes, and debating the precise shade of ivory for the floral arrangements. The chateau, a sprawling estate in wine country that looked like it had been airlifted from the French countryside, was secured within the first week. We had to pull from our retirement savings and take out a small loan for the deposit, my father Bryant told me over the phone, his voice a mixture of martyrdom and pride. "But your sister deserves the best. This is her moment." Meanwhile, Kyler and I sat on the floor of our small apartment, eating pizza from a cardboard box and planning our own wedding on a legal pad. "A garden ceremony," I said, circling the words. "Maybe at the public botanical gardens. It's beautiful in the spring." Kyler reached over and took my hand. "Are you sure that's what you want, Trin? We can afford more if we save for another year." I shook my head, the certainty settling deep in my bones. "No, I don't want to wait. And I don't want their help. I don't want their money, their opinions, or their passive-aggressive sighs. This is for us. We'll pay for it ourselves. We don't need anyone's validation." He smiled, that slow, genuine smile that always made me feel safe. "Okay," he said. A garden wedding it is, and it felt more real, more meaningful than any chateau ever could. A month later, I was at Stella's bridal shower. It was held in the private room of an expensive downtown restaurant, filled with women in pastel dresses sipping champagne. I felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. Stella was holding court, recounting a dramatic story about her dress fitting while my mother beamed at her side. I was trying to make myself as small as possible in a corner when Reagan cornered me by the gift table. She held a flute of champagne, her knuckles white. "Trinity, we need to talk," she said, her voice low and sharp. She steered me toward a small alcove away from the chatter. Her eyes scanned my simple blue dress, a gift from Kyla, with undisguised disapproval. "I'm worried about you," she began, which was her opening line for every lecture I'd ever received. "This marriage, it's a mistake." I stared at her, speechless. "What are you talking about?" "Kyla is a labourer," she hissed, as if the word itself was a disease. "He works with his hands. His family has no name, no connections. Morgan's family is legacy. Stella is securing her future. You," she said, her gaze sweeping over me with pity, "are marrying below your station, in every way. You're throwing your life away on a carpenter." The air left my lungs. All the years of being second best, of being the practical one, of swallowing my hurt, it all coalesced into a single, searing point of pain behind my eyes. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Kyla's hands had built a life for us, that his integrity was worth more than Morgan's entire stock portfolio, but I just stood there, silent, my specialty. "Think about your future, Trinity," she finished, her tone softening into faux concern. "It's not too late to reconsider." She patted my arm, a gesture devoid of any warmth, and walked back to the party, her smile firmly back in place. I stood in the alcove, my heart hammering against my ribs, feeling the familiar sting of tears I refused to let fall. I pulled out my phone, needing a distraction, a lifeline to the real world. I opened my messages to text Kyla, to tell him I loved him, that he was all that mattered. That's when I saw it. A new message from an unknown number. It was short, just a single sentence. My blood ran cold as I read the words. "The chateau's owned by the Zimmermans." My fingers trembled so badly I almost dropped my phone. I read the text again, then a third time, the words glowing in the dim light of the alcove. "The chateau's owned by the Zimmermans." It didn't make sense. Kyla's father, Walter, was a quiet, unassuming man. He lived in a modest ranch house, drove a 10-year-old truck, and his idea of a fancy dinner was the local steakhouse. He was successful, Kyla had told me, in commercial real estate, but he never, ever talked about it. I didn't mention the text until Kyla and I were back in our apartment. The scent of champagne and my mother's perfume still clung to my dress. I handed him my phone. He read the message, his brow furrowing. "What is this?" "It came during the shower," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "From a number I don't know." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen. "My dad owns a lot of properties through a holding company," he said slowly. "He never uses his own name. He hates the attention." He looked up at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "It's possible." The next day, I called Walter and asked if we could meet for coffee. He agreed without hesitation. We met at a small, no-frills diner halfway between our homes. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth with a black coffee, reading a newspaper. He looked more like a retired high school history teacher than a property mogul. I slid into the booth, my heart pounding. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course, Trinity," he said, folding his paper. "Kyla told me what your mother said to you at the shower. I'm sorry you were subjected to that. His directness caught me off guard." "He did?" Walter nodded, his expression serious. "He was angry and hurt for you. Which is why I thought you should know the truth." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I had my assistant send you that message. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I figured you deserved all the facts." I just stared at him. "So it's true? You own the chateau?" He gave a small, almost reluctant nod. I built it 12 years ago. It's a good investment. Kyla and I, we don't flaunt things. It's not how we were raised. But when Kyla told me both you and Stella were getting married, I thought it would be a nice, quiet gesture, a poetic wedding gift to both my son's bride and her sister. He looked me straight in the eye. I waived the venue fee for your parents, anonymously, of course. They think the manager gave them a discretionary discount for booking so early. The room started to spin. My parents had taken out a loan. They were pulling from their retirement, all for a show. For a property that my unrefined fiancé's family owned outright. The bitter cosmic irony of it was so thick I could barely breathe. I saw the power in it then, a single, undeniable truth that could shatter the entire facade my parents had so carefully constructed. They don't know, I said, the idea taking root. They have no idea. None, Walter confirmed. And they don't have to. The gift was for you and Kyla. What they do with their end of it is their business. He leaned forward slightly. But Trinity, if their behaviour is causing you pain, just know the truth is a tool you have every right to use. I met my best friend Zara for a drink that night and told her everything. She listened intently, a slow, wicked grin spreading across her face. "Oh, this is beautiful," she said, swirling the ice in her glass. "This is Shakespearean level stuff." She looked at me, her eyes sparkling. "You can't say a word, not yet." "What do you mean?" "Don't you see?" she said, leaning in. "They're building this entire narrative of sacrifice and class on a foundation of lies. They're bragging about a castle they didn't pay for. You have to let them finish it. Let them build their throne with borrowed bricks. The higher they climb, the harder they'll fall." Her words settled over me, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't the victim in their story anymore. I was the narrator. The wedding was 2 months away. The rehearsal dinner was held in a private dining room at the chateau itself. My parents were in their element, gliding through the room, accepting compliments. Stella was radiant, Morgan was stiff, and I was a ghost observing it all. During the toast, my father stood up, glass in hand. He spoke of hard work and providing the best for his children. Then Reagan stood beside him, beaming. "We're just so thrilled to give Stella the wedding she's always dreamed of," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured humility. "We're basically carrying this whole wedding because she deserves it. I mean, look at this venue. A legacy." Across the table, Kyla caught my eye. I took a slow sip of my water and gave him the smallest, faintest smile. The show was just getting started. Watching my parents bask in false glory at the rehearsal dinner unlocked a Pandora's box of memories I had long suppressed. It wasn't just about the big things like the car or the private school tuition. It was the 1,000 tiny cuts, the small daily dismissals that taught me my worth was conditional. I remembered being 8, winning first place in the school science fair with a project I'd spent weeks on. I came home beaming, clutching my blue ribbon. Stella, who was 11, had a ballet recital that same night. My ribbon was taped to the fridge without a word, and we rushed out the door so we wouldn't be late for her performance. After the recital, my parents took her out for ice cream to celebrate. I sat in the back of the car, the sticky sweetness of her victory filling the air while my own achievement dissolved into nothing. I remembered being 17 and getting a partial academic scholarship to the state university. My father had looked at the acceptance letter and said, "That's good, Trinity. It'll help with expenses." A few months later, when Stella decided she wanted to study abroad for a semester in Italy, they cashed out the savings bonds they'd been putting away for my college education to fund her trip. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime cultural experience," my mother had explained, as if my 4 years of education were just a line item on a budget. Each memory was a stone, and I had been carrying them for so long I'd forgotten how heavy they were. But now, armed with Walter's secret, the weight was different. It wasn't crushing me anymore. It was ballast. It was channeling all that pain into a quiet, unshakable strength. I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling strategic. The final weeks leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in Stella's self-absorption. The golden child was cracking under the pressure of her own perfect image. She threw a screaming fit at the florist because the peonies were more blushed than bashful pink. She made her bridesmaid cry during a dress fitting by loudly announcing she looked like a sausage in seafoam. My mother followed in her wake, smoothing things over with caterers and designers, murmuring, "It's just the pre-wedding jitters. She's a perfectionist." Morgan, Stella's polished fiancé, seemed to be losing his shine. His smiles became tighter, his posture more rigid. During one particularly ugly incident at a cake tasting, where Stella accused the baker of trying to poison her with almond extract, I saw Morgan physically recoil. He looked exhausted. Kyla noticed it too. We were at our apartment one evening, a week before the wedding, addressing invitations for our own small ceremony. He was carefully lettering each envelope while I applied the stamps. "I saw them at that home decor store downtown today," he said, not looking up from his work. She was yelling at him about throw pillows in the middle of the store. He finally paused and met my gaze. "That guy's regretting it. You can hear it in his laugh now. It's hollow." He was right. The effortless charm Morgan had exuded when they first got engaged had been replaced by a strained, brittle politeness. He looked like a man trapped in a gilded cage, and the door was about to be locked. The day before the wedding was the chapel walk-through at the chateau. The place was magnificent, with soaring ceilings and stained glass windows that cast jewel-toned light across the marble floors. Stella was directing the wedding planner with the authority of a drill sergeant. My parents stood by, nodding at her every command. I was standing off to the side, just watching, when my father approached me. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, his expression grave. "Trinity," he said, his voice low. "Tomorrow is a very important day for this family." For Stella, I waited. "I need you to be graceful. Keep your husband quiet. Don't draw any attention. Just smile and be supportive. Let your sister shine." He squeezed my shoulder as if to emphasize his point. "You've always been good at that." He walked away before I could respond, rejoining my mother and Stella to admire the altar. I stood frozen in a beam of sapphire light, his words echoing in the vast empty space. "You've always been good at that." He said it like a compliment, a testament to my character. But I heard it for what it was, a command to remain in the shadows where I had always been. I looked over at Kyla, who had seen the whole exchange. He gave me a look that said, "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, the cold, still air of the chapel filling my lungs. I nodded back at him. I was more than okay. I was ready. The morning of the wedding was chaos orchestrated by a tyrant. I arrived at the bridal suite at the chateau to find Stella in full bridezilla mode. Hairpins were flying, makeup artists were cowering, and the air was thick with the scent of hairspray and simmering rage. "The mimosas are too pulpy!" she shrieked at a terrified-looking catering assistant. "Are you trying to ruin my entire day?" My mother, Reagan, rushed to her side. "Don't you worry, sweetie. Mommy will handle it." She turned to the young woman. "Get her a new one, now." And strain at this time, I watched the scene from the doorway, a silent observer as always. The staff were scrambling, their faces a mixture of fear and professional resolve. My parents defended every tantrum, excused every insult. They saw a passionate bride demanding perfection. I saw a deeply insecure woman unravelling because, for the first time, the spotlight she craved was burning her. I found a quiet corner to get my own makeup done, keeping my head down and my mouth shut. My phone buzzed in my purse. It was a text from Zara. "You are not going to believe this. Your mother is on a roll." A second text followed immediately. "She's telling Morgan's great aunt that his family was so generous to bless them with the use of this magnificent venue. She's literally taking credit for a gift she never received." I read the message, and a cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't just an omission or an assumption anymore. This was an outright lie. My parents were actively fabricating a story to inflate their own social standing, using Walter's quiet generosity as a prop. They weren't just building a throne on borrowed bricks. They were engraving their own names on them. I felt a sudden need for fresh air. I slipped out of the suite and walked down a long, quiet hallway, my bridesmaid dress rustling against the marble floors. I found a small, secluded balcony overlooking the vineyards. The morning sun was warm on my face. A few minutes later, a calm voice spoke from behind me. "It's a beautiful view from here." I turned to see Walter standing there. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored suit that made him look distinguished but not flashy. Kyla was standing beside him. "It is," I said, managing a small smile. Walter's gaze was kind but perceptive. He could see the tension in my shoulders, the storm behind my eyes. "Are you all right, Trinity?" I took a deep breath. "My mother is telling people that Morgan's family gifted them the venue." Walter's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Kyla put a steadying hand on my arm. "We can just let it go," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter," Walter said gently. "It matters because it's a lie. And it matters because it's hurting you." He looked out at the rolling hills, the rows of grapevines stretching toward the horizon. "I made this offer to you and Kyla as a gift, a gesture of family. I'm not interested in seeing it used as a tool for social climbing." He turned back to me, his eyes holding mine. "The plan we discussed, it's still an option. I can say something during my toast, but I need you to be sure. If this is still what you want, I'll do it. But once it's said, it can't be undone. The consequences will be real." I thought of my mother's cutting words at the bridal shower. I thought of my father telling me to stay quiet and let my sister shine. I thought of every birthday, every achievement, every part of me that had been minimized to make Stella seem bigger, brighter. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction. It was about setting the record straight, not with anger or malice, but with the simple, undeniable weight of the truth. I looked from Walter's steady gaze to Kyla's supportive one. He squeezed my arm gently, leaving the decision entirely to me. I finally had a voice, and I knew exactly how I wanted to use it. I nodded at Walter, my resolve hardening into steel. Let the toast burn the veil. The ceremony was exactly what my parents had paid for. Lavish, excessive, and utterly theatrical. Stella glided down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my car, a serene smile plastered on her face, as if she hadn't been screaming about mimosas just hours before. Morgan waited at the altar, his own smile looking more like a grimace. From my spot in the bridesmaid lineup, I had a perfect view of my parents in the front row, dabbing at their eyes with performative emotion. They weren't watching their daughter get married, they were watching the premiere of a movie they had produced. The reception was even more over the top. A string quartet played in the grand ballroom, ice sculptures melted slowly on buffet tables, and waiters circulated with trays of champagne and caviar. The whole affair felt less like a celebration of love and more like a corporate networking event. My parents took centre stage as soon as the dinner plates were cleared. My father, Bryant, tapped his glass for attention, his chest puffed out. He launched into a rambling speech about family, tradition, and the sacrifices parents make for their children. "When you see your daughter achieve her dreams," he said, gesturing towards Stella, "you know that every sacrifice was worth it. We've always believed in giving our children the foundation they need to build a legacy, and today we see that legacy taking shape." The room applauded politely. My mother, Reagan, then took the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. She spoke of Stella's grace and beauty, and then turned her attention to Morgan's family. "And we are so, so grateful," she said, looking directly at Morgan's parents, "for the incredible generosity that has been shown to our family. This beautiful place, it's a testament to what can be achieved when two great families come together." I saw Morgan's mother give his father a slightly confused look. They clearly had no idea what she was talking about. I glanced over at my friend Zara, who was seated at a nearby table. She caught my eye and subtly angled her phone, pretending to adjust something on the table. She was recording. Another friend, Zoe, who had known our family since childhood and had witnessed the favouritism firsthand, was doing the same from the other side of the room. They were my silent witnesses, collecting receipts. Finally, after the best man and maid of honour had given their speeches, the MC announced the final toast of the evening. And now, a few words from the father of the groom's family, Mr. Walter Zimmerman. A quiet ripple of anticipation went through the room. Walter, in his understated suit, looked completely at ease as he walked to the microphone. He wasn't a man who commanded attention with volume, but with presence. He adjusted the mic, his calm demeanour a stark contrast to my parents' theatricality. He started conventionally with warm words about love, marriage, and the joining of families. He congratulated Stella and Morgan, his voice smooth and sincere. My parents were beaming, nodding along, completely oblivious. Then he paused. He took a slow sip of water, and the energy in the room shifted. He scanned the crowd until his eyes landed on me and Kyla. He gave us a small, almost imperceptible smile. He raised his glass. Let's talk about what a gift truly is. A true gift, Walter continued, his voice even and calm, resonating through the suddenly quiet ballroom, is given without expectation of praise. It's a quiet gesture, meant to support, not to be a monument to one's own generosity. He turned his gaze slightly, a subtle shift that seemed to encompass both Stella and me. When my son Kyla told me that both of the Matthews daughters were getting married this year, I was overjoyed. Family is everything to us. And in our family, we believe in treating our children's partners as our own. He paused again, letting the words hang in the air. My mother was still smiling, but it was a brittle, confused expression. My father's hand, holding his champagne flute, had frozen halfway to his mouth. And so, Walter said, his voice ringing with clarity, we were proud to gift the use of our venue, this beautiful chateau, to both our future daughters-in-law for their weddings. Anonymously, of course. A collective gasp rippled through the room. It was a soft, sharp sound, like 100 people sucking in their breath at once. Stella's perfectly made-up face went slack with shock. Her hand, clutching her bouquet of blush peonies, went limp, and the flowers tumbled to the floor with a soft thud. Walter wasn't finished. He looked directly at me, his expression softening with genuine warmth. I especially want to thank Trinity, he said, his voice full of paternal pride I'd never once heard from my own father. Thank you for your grace, for your integrity, and for never once asking your parents for a dime to fund your own wedding, choosing instead to build your future on your own terms, with your own hard work. You and Kyla are a testament to what a true partnership looks like. We are so proud to welcome you into our family. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with shock and dawning horror. Every eye in the room darted between Walter, my parents, and me. I didn't look at them. I kept my gaze straight ahead, my hands folded quietly in Kyla's lap under the table. His thumb stroked the back of my hand, a steady, grounding presence. I saw my father's face go completely pale, the colour draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. My mother, Reagan, made a small choking sound and took a gulp of her wine, some of it sloshing over the rim of the glass onto the white tablecloth. Then, in a single, deliberate movement, Morgan removed his arm from around Stella's waist. He took a small step away from her, creating a physical distance that was as loud as a scream. Zara, sitting at the next table, leaned over and whispered in my ear, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. That was biblical. The spell was broken. A low murmur erupted across the ballroom as guests began whispering to each other, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. The lie so carefully constructed had been dismantled with a few simple, honest sentences. My mother couldn't take it. She pushed her chair back with a screech, the sound grating in the tense quiet. Without a word, she turned and stormed out of the ballroom, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. A few of her closest relatives, looking deeply uncomfortable, hesitated for a moment before scurrying out after her. The great performance was over, and the producers were fleeing the theatre. The wedding didn't so much end as it did collapse. After my mother's dramatic exit, the atmosphere became unbearably awkward. The band played a few half-hearted songs to a near-empty dance floor before packing up early. Stella was last seen being led away by a bridesmaid, her face streaked with mascara. Morgan had simply vanished. Kyla and I slipped out quietly, the chaos of their implosion fading behind us. The aftermath was a slow-motion car crash, relayed to me in bits and pieces through text from Zara and a few guilt-ridden relatives. Morgan, as Kyla had predicted, was taking time to re-evaluate. The word from his family was that the engagement was off. Stella, stripped of her fiancé and her carefully crafted image, was spiralling, refusing to leave her room at my parents' house. My mother, Reagan, was on a rampage, calling relatives to spin a new narrative about how Walter had humiliated them, how they'd been cruelly deceived. But the truth was out, and it had more power than her lies ever did. My phone, which had been silent for years except for obligatory holiday texts, started buzzing with messages from cousins and aunts. I'm so sorry for how they've always treated you. You handled that with so much class. Even a few of Stella's bridesmaids reached out. They didn't offer apologies, but they started following me on social media, their sudden curiosity a quiet admission that they were finally seeing the real story. For the first time, I wasn't an afterthought. I was a person. Kyla and I returned to our world. It was a world of sawdust and sunlight in our small apartment, of quiet dinners and easy laughter. It was modest and real, built on a foundation of respect, not performance. A few weeks after the wedding that wasn't, we got married at the Botanical Gardens on a perfect spring afternoon. It was a small ceremony with just Kyla's family and a handful of our closest friends. Walter walked me down the aisle. There was no grand reception, no ice sculptures, just a joyful backyard barbecue at Walter's house. It was low-key, and it was perfect. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't even feel triumphant. What I felt was a profound sense of clarity, as if a fog I'd been living in my whole life had finally lifted. The anger and resentment I had carried for so long had been replaced by a quiet, peaceful emptiness. I wasn't defined by their approval, or the lack of it. I was just me, and that was enough. One evening, about a month after our wedding, Zara sent me a link. It was a video, pieced together from the clips she and Zoe had taken at the reception. It starts with my father's speech about sacrifice, then my mother's gushing lies about generosity, before cutting seamlessly to Walter's calm, devastating toast. The camera work was shaky, but the audio was crystal clear. It had been posted on a local wedding-shaming forum and had, in the parlance of the internet, gone viral. I watched it, curled up on the sofa next to Kyla. I saw my parents' faces shift from pride to confusion to horror. I saw Stella's bouquet fall. I saw Morgan step away. And then, at the very end, the camera zoomed in on me for just a second. I was looking straight ahead, my expression unreadable, but as Walter finished speaking, the faintest hint of a smile touched my lips. It wasn't a smile of victory, but of release. It was the smile of a woman who was finally being seen, not as a shadow, but on her own terms. All it took was truth, patience, and karma, wearing a borrowed crown.
The silence was the first thing that hit me, not the quiet of an empty house in the middle of a weekday, but a hollow, intentional silence, the kind that sucks the air out of a room. My name is Laurel. I'm 36 years old, and for the last 15 years, I've been the perfect wife to my husband, Kyle, who is 38. I've also been the perfect mother to our son, Stefan, who is 10, and the perfect daughter-in-law to Kyle's mother, Alexandra. I hosted the perfect parties, kept the perfect home, and smiled the perfect smile, all while they cultivated the image of me as a charming but slightly helpless dependent. It was a role I played beautifully. I'd just come from a 2-hour coffee meeting downtown, a routine I'd established years ago. Kyle thought I met with other stay-at-home moms to gossip. He never asked for details. Today, the house felt wrong. Stefan's backpack wasn't by the door where he always dropped it after school. Kyle's car, the one he only drove on weekends, was gone from the garage. I walked into our master bedroom and my breath caught. His side of the closet was bare. Hangers hung in neat, empty rows. His drawers were open and vacant. Panic tried to claw its way up my throat, but I shoved it down. Panic is a luxury. I walked back to the kitchen, my heels clicking on the hardwood floors. There, on the gleaming granite island, was a single piece of Alexandra's ridiculously expensive cream-colored stationery. A dark, circular coffee stain marred the bottom corner, a mark of casual disrespect. The note was written in my mother-in-law's perfect, looping cursive. It was short. Laurel. Kyle has started a new chapter. We feel it's for the best. A good wife shouldn't need money of her own, so we've taken steps to simplify your transition. You'll find $12 in the cookie jar for coffee. Regards. Alexandra and Kyle. $12. For 15 years of my life. I walked over to the ceramic cookie jar, the one Stefan and I had painted together when he was 5, and lifted the lid. Inside, next to a few stale chocolate chip cookies, was a $10 bill and 2 ones. They hadn't even bothered to get the amount right. I didn't cry. I didn't scream or throw the cookie jar against the wall, though the thought was tempting. I simply folded the note, slid it into my pocket, and went to my phone to check our joint savings account. The balance read, 12.47. They'd cleaned it out. Every last cent I thought we had. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it wash over me. The condescension. The assumption that I would crumble, that I would be a helpless victim with no resources and nowhere to go. They had written me out of my own life and left me with pocket change. Then, a slow, quiet smirk spread across my face. I walked into my home office, a small room Kyle called my hobby space, and sat down at my desk. I woke up my laptop, ignoring the family photo of the 3 of us smiling on a beach that served as the screensaver. I clicked past it, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I opened a secure, encrypted drive, one that didn't sync to any cloud, and navigated to a folder hidden 3 layers deep. The folder was labeled simply, Assets. I opened a file, a consolidated balance sheet that was updated weekly. For the last 7 years, while playing the part of the perfect non-working wife, I've been secretly building a boutique online marketing consultancy. I handle crisis PR and brand rehabilitation for high-profile tech clients who value discretion above all else. My little hobby was currently clearing more in a good quarter than my husband made in a year from his cushy corporate VP job. The company, legally shielded behind 2 shell corporations and registered in another state, was worth more than every asset Kyle and his mother thought they had. They left me with $12. My business account, the one they knew nothing about, held just over $1.4 million. My laptop pinged with a new email notification. It was from Cassandra, my best friend of 20 years and my silent business partner. She was the only one who knew the whole truth. The subject line was a single word. Now? I opened it. The body of the email was just as brief. Ready to go nuclear? I took a deep breath, the first truly clean one I'd taken all day, and typed my reply. Light the match. My phone buzzed less than a minute after I hit send. Cassandra's name lit up the screen. I answered, putting it on speaker. "Tell me you're out of that house," she said, her voice a low growl. No hello, no preamble. That was Cassandra. "Not yet. I just walked in an hour ago. Laurel, you need to call a lawyer. Now. I have Botran's number ready. He's the best, and he's discreet." "Then you pack a bag and you come here." "I will," I said calmly, my eyes scanning the empty picture frames on the wall where our wedding photos used to be. They'd even taken those. "But not in that order. First, we stick to the plan." "The plan was for a managed, civilized separation," she shot back. "The plan did not involve them looting the accounts and leaving you with $12 and a passive-aggressive piece of stationery." "This is a declaration of war." I couldn't help but let out a short, dry laugh. "I know, and they think they just launched a surprise attack. They have no idea I've had my cannons aimed at their ship for years." For 15 years, I had smiled. I smiled through Alexandra's backhanded compliments about how I'd done so well for a girl with no family money. I smiled when Kyle's business partners would ask what I did, and he'd answer for me. Laurel's focus is our family, patting my hand as if I were a prized pet. I smiled through every single holiday, fundraiser, and corporate dinner I planned and executed flawlessly, only to have Alexandra take the credit. I remembered one Christmas about 5 years ago. I'd spent weeks preparing. Kyle was up for a big promotion. I'd curated the guest list, designed the menu, and charmed every single board member. At the end of the night, with everyone raising a glass, Alexandra had stood up and said, "I'm so glad my son has a wife who knows her place is to support his success." It wasn't a compliment. It was a boundary. A reminder of the box they'd put me in. Cassandra was the only one who saw the steel behind the smile. "You let them do it, Lore," she said, her voice softening slightly. "You let them build this narrative that you were just a pretty accessory." "It was the perfect cover," I replied, pulling up the banking portal on my laptop. "I let them think I was a bird in a gilded cage. They never bothered to check if I was the one who built the cage. They wanted a dependent, so I gave them one. It made them comfortable. It made them careless." "Well, they're about to get very uncomfortable," she said. "What's the first move?" "The first move is to play the part they've assigned me," I said, my fingers clicking as I logged into the main account portal. "I'm going to be the distraught, abandoned wife. I'll call Kyle, crying. I'll call his brother Julius, confused and scared. I'll let Alexandra think she's won. While they're busy celebrating, I'll be gathering every last piece of evidence I need to dismantle them. And Stefan?" My breath hitched. They have him. For now. But that's the leverage that will make them move recklessly. They'll use him to try and control me, and in doing so, they'll show their hand. "Okay," Cassandra said, a reluctant agreement in her tone. "Play your part. But I'm sending you Bo's contact info. Call him tomorrow. Get the clock started." "I will. Talk soon." I hung up and turned my full attention to the screen. The joint savings account was empty, as expected. The checking account was the same. But I wasn't looking at the balances. I was looking at the transaction history, going back a full year. I needed to see where the money went. Most of it had been transferred out that morning, a single wire to an account I didn't recognize. A corporate account by the name. Easy enough to trace. But as I scrolled back, my eyes caught something else. An anomaly. 6 months ago. A wire transfer for $50,000. It wasn't a business payment. It wasn't a transfer to family. It was a personal wire, authorized by Kyle, from our savings. I clicked on the transaction details, my heart starting to beat a little faster. The recipient was a name I had never heard before, Talia Cox. The next morning I began my performance. I called Kyle's phone. It went straight to voicemail as I knew it would. I left a message, carefully pitching my voice to sound shaky and tearful, begging him to just tell me what was going on. Then I called his brother, Julius. He answered on the third ring, his voice cautious. I played the part of the confused, heartbroken wife perfectly, telling him I came home to an empty house and a cruel note. He sounded genuinely shocked, promising to find out what was happening. He was a passive man, but not a malicious one. I knew he was a pawn, not a player. My real target was his wife, Paige. I knew she did her grocery shopping on Tuesday mornings at the upscale market a few towns over, the one Alexandra preferred. I put on a pair of old jeans and a faded sweatshirt, skipped makeup, and drove there. I found her in the produce section, looking stressed as she tried to pick out an avocado. I walked up to her, making my eyes look wide and lost. "Paige?" She turned, and her face fell with pity when she saw me. "Laurel. Oh my God. Julius just called me. Are you okay?" "I don't know," I whispered, letting a tear slip down my cheek. I was rather proud of that touch. "I don't understand any of this." They took everything, even Stefan. She reached out and squeezed my arm. Paige, at 33, had been in the Thornton family for a decade, and I knew for a fact that Alexandra treated her with the same subtle disdain she'd always shown me. We weren't from the right families, the right money. We were outsiders who had married in. "Let's get coffee," she said, her voice firm as she abandoned her shopping cart. "My treat." We sat in a corner booth at the cafe next door. I let her lead the conversation, just nodding and dabbing at my eyes with a napkin. "It's Alexandra," Paige finally said, her voice low and angry. "This has her fingerprints all over it. The note, the cruelty of it. That's her. Kyle is weak. He does whatever she says." She leaned in closer. "I've been trying to get Julius to see it for years. She manipulates everything. Our finances, our vacations, even what preschool we chose for our kids. She has to be in control." I looked at her, my expression one of pure, wounded innocence. "But the money, our joint savings, how could they just take it?" Paige hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. She looked around as if Alexandra herself might be listening. "Laurel, you have to be careful. They hide things. 6 or 7 years ago, Alexandra had Julius sign some papers. She said it was for a small investment property, a tax write-off for the family. But I saw the bank statements later by accident. The down payment came from one of your and Kyle's accounts. The property is in Julius's name, but you and Kyle paid for it. She told Julius it was just a formality to protect family assets." My mind raced, connecting dots. A hidden property, paid for with our money, laundered through his brother. It was cleaner, smarter, and more illegal than I could have imagined. "I didn't know," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "Of course you didn't," she said, squeezing my hand. "That's how she operates. She makes you feel like you're a guest in your own life." The next day, I walked into the downtown office of Beau Tran. Cassandra had been right. He was sharp, level-headed, and his office was minimalist and efficient. He was 45, with a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I didn't cry or play the victim with him. I laid out the facts: the empty house, the drained accounts, the note. I told him about my secret business and showed him my last 2 years of income statements. He listened without interruption, his face unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "They've made a critical mistake," he said. "They underestimated you. And in doing so, they've gotten sloppy. The note from your mother-in-law is a gift. It establishes intent. Draining the joint account is an obvious attempt to hide marital assets." "There's more," I said, and told him what Paige had revealed about the property in Julius's name. Beau's eyebrows shot up. "That moves this from a messy divorce to potential fraud. We'll subpoena every financial document they've touched for the last 10 years. Bank records, brokerage accounts, property deeds. In the meantime, you do nothing. You continue to be the woman they think you are. Let them think you're broken. The more confident they are, the more mistakes they'll make." I left his office feeling a surge of cold, clear power. The plan was in motion. I was driving back to the small apartment I'd rented when my phone buzzed with a message from Cassandra. It wasn't text, it was a series of images. The first was a screenshot from a social media profile belonging to Talia Cox. Her profile picture showed her smiling, wrapped in Kyle's arms. The second was a photo of them clinking champagne glasses on the porch of a beautiful new house. The caption read, "Making a home with my one and only. New beginnings." The last image was a screenshot of the public property records for that house. The sale had closed 3 weeks ago. The owners were listed as Kyle Thornton and Talia Cox. Vengeance, I discovered, had its own marketing campaign. While Beau Tran's office was busy preparing a mountain of subpoenas, I went to work in my own field of expertise. Kyle's professional reputation was his most prized asset, and I knew all its vulnerabilities. I had, after all, helped him build it. Now, I would quietly and methodically tear it down. I started by creating a series of ghost profiles on key industry forums, seeding anonymous but credible-sounding chatter about instability in his company's leadership. I used my skills to disrupt the search engine results for his name, pushing positive articles down and elevating neutral, less flattering ones. Using a VPN and encrypted email, I sent his resume to several of his company's direct competitors, knowing the inquiries back to his HR department would raise questions about his loyalty. It was digital death by 1,000 paper cuts. Within 2 weeks, the pressure started to show. Julius mentioned to Paige during a strained phone call that Kyle was on edge, that a huge potential client had mysteriously pulled out at the last minute. Kyle, of course, blamed the market, a junior associate, anything but the smiling, helpless wife he thought he'd left destitute. He had no idea the calls that were supposed to go to his office were being subtly rerouted through a digital dead end I'd constructed. Then, exactly as I predicted, Alexandra made her move. My phone rang on a Thursday afternoon. Her name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering, taking a deep breath to steady my voice. When I picked up, I made sure it was thick with unshed tears. "Hello?" I whispered. "Laurel, dear," she said, her tone a sickening blend of condescension and feigned concern. "I'm so glad I reached you. We've all been so worried." "Worried?" I asked, my voice cracking on cue. "Of course. This is a difficult time. But I'm calling about Stefan. He needs his routine. Kyle and I think it would be best if you signed the preliminary custody agreement. It just makes things cleaner, and it would give you specified visitation rights. We can have the papers couriered to you." There it was, the leverage. They wanted me to sign away my rights to my son, believing I was too broken and too poor to fight back. I don't have a lawyer, Alexandra," I stammered. "I don't understand any of these things. I was looking at some old financial papers from our safe, and I don't understand them. The ones for Stefan's education fund." I let my voice trail off. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about that," she said smoothly. "That's all taken care of. It's for Stefan's future." This was my moment. I had the call on speaker, a digital recorder running silently on my laptop. "It's just some of the signatures on the transfer documents. Kyle's signature looks different than usual." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the cogs turning in her arrogant mind. She thought I was a clueless child. "Laurel," she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial, patronizing tone. "A family like ours is a complex business. Sometimes a man is too busy to handle every little detail. And sometimes, a mother knows what's best for her son's financial security. A strong woman has to be willing to guide his hand, even guide his own pen, for the good of the family." Kyle understood that. He always does. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my voice remained steady. "So, you signed for him?" "I ensured the family's assets were protected," she corrected, the steel returning to her voice. "That's all you need to know. Now, about those papers. A courier will be there within the hour." She hung up. I sat in silence for a full minute, the recording still running. Guide his own pen. She'd admitted it. She'd confessed to forgery on a recorded line. I saved the file, encrypted it, and immediately sent it to Beautran with a brief 1-line email. "Call me when you've listened to this." He called back in less than 10 minutes. His voice, usually so calm and measured, had a new, sharp edge to it. "Laurel," he said, "what your mother-in-law just described, what she just admitted to you on this recording, that's not just a civil matter for a divorce court. She confessed to a felony. This changes everything." Armed with Alexandra's confession, I knew I had to force the next move. I sent a copy of the audio file to Julius. Not to his email, which I was sure his mother monitored, but to a private messaging app he used for his fantasy football league, an account Paige had told me about. I attached a simple message. Your mother is about to take your brother down for felony fraud. You need to decide which side you're on. This is your only chance to protect your own family. The response was faster than I expected. He called me an hour later, his voice strained and low. Where did you get this? She said it to me, Julius. She admitted to forging Kyle's name on documents to move money out of our son's education fund. She's been using you both. My mother would never. He started, but his voice lacked conviction. The recording was undeniable. Wouldn't she? I asked softly. Think about the property in your name, the one I paid for. She told you it was a tax write-off. She lied to you, Julius. She's been using your clean record to hide their dirty money. When this all comes out in court, and it will, you'll be implicated. Do you really want to be part of that? I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, the sound ragged. He wasn't a bad man, just a weak one, conditioned his entire life to follow his mother's lead. I was asking him to break 41 years of programming. What do you want? He finally asked. Access, I said, to the old family trust documents, the ones your father set up before he died. Alexandra has them in the safe at the main house. I know you have a key. He was silent for a long time. Meet me tomorrow, at the public library downtown, 10 a.m. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next morning, Julius looked pale and exhausted. He slid a thick manila envelope across the table without making eye contact. These are copies, he said. I don't want to be involved. You already are, I told him, my voice gentle but firm. But this is how you get uninvolved. Thank you, Julius. I took the envelope straight to Cassandra's apartment. We spread the documents across her dining room table. It was a labyrinth of trusts, sub-trusts, and holding companies, but the breadcrumbs were there. Alexandra hadn't just forged Kyle's signature once. She'd been doing it for years, moving money through shell accounts and using Stefan's education fund as a personal slush fund to inflate Kyle's investment portfolio. It was systematic, arrogant, and deeply illegal. This is the mother lode, Cassandra breathed, pointing to a series of transfers. She's been skimming from the family trust your father-in-law set up for the grandkids. She's literally been stealing from her own grandchildren to fund Kyle's lifestyle. And now we have the paper trail to prove it, I said, a cold satisfaction settling in my chest. It's time to stop playing defense. Cassandra grinned, a sharp, predatory expression. My favorite part, the PR attack. We have the narrative, a devoted mother and wife, discarded by a cheating husband and his criminal mother, who not only stole her marital assets, but embezzled from her own son's trust fund. It's a masterpiece of greed and betrayal. By the time I'm done, Alexandra won't be able to get a reservation at a diner, let alone a seat on a charity board. With the financial evidence, the audio confession, and Julius's corroborating documents, I had everything I needed. I called Beautran. We're ready, I said. I want to schedule a mediation. A mediation? He asked, surprised. Laurel, with this evidence, we could go straight to a judge. We could file criminal charges. I know, I said, but that's not the point. I don't just want to win. I want them to sit in a room and watch their entire world burn down around them. I want to see their faces when they realize the good wife they threw away is the one holding the torch. There was a pause on the line. All right, Beau said, a hint of admiration in his voice. We'll schedule it. Who do you want present? Kyle, obviously, and his lawyer. I took a breath. And I want Alexandra Thornton there, not as a guest, not as a support system for her son. I want her named as a co-defendant in the civil fraud claim. I want her sitting at that table, legally bound to answer for what she's done. The mediation was held in a sterile conference room in a downtown high-rise. The air was thick with tension and the smell of expensive bad coffee. Kyle and Alexandra sat on one side of the massive mahogany table, flanking their lawyer, a slick man in a suit that probably cost more than my first car. They both wore expressions of smug confidence. Kyle looked annoyed, as if this were a tedious formality before his inevitable victory. Alexandra looked bored, occasionally inspecting her perfectly manicured nails. They saw me sitting alone with Bo and assumed I was a lamb being led to slaughter. Behind a one-way mirror in an adjacent observation room, Cassandra sat with a notepad, ready to document every reaction. Paige and Julius were waiting in a separate room down the hall, ready to be called. The mediator, a retired judge with a no-nonsense demeanor, started the proceedings. Mr. Thornton's counsel has submitted a settlement offer, she began, sliding a document across the table. It offers Mrs. Thornton a one-time payment of $25,000 in exchange for waiving all future claims to marital assets and granting full physical and legal custody of the minor child, Stephen Thornton, to Mr. Thornton. Alexandra smirked. Kyle leaned back in his chair, a conqueror. Bo didn't even glance at the paper. He simply pushed it back across the table. "We reject the offer," he said calmly. "And we have a counter-filing." He produced a thick binder and placed it in front of the mediator. "In this binder, you will find documentation of Mrs. Thornton's personal income for the last 7 years, generated from a consulting business she owns and operates. As you'll see, her average annual income significantly exceeds Mr. Thornton's." Kyle's smirk vanished. He sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with disbelief. Alexandra's perfectly sculpted face tightened. Bo continued, his voice even and relentless. "You will also find a forensic accounting report tracing $50,000 from the couple's joint savings, transferred by Mr. Thornton to a Ms. Talia Cox 6 months ago, which was subsequently used as a down payment on a property they purchased together while still legally married." Kyle went pale. His lawyer started shuffling through his papers, suddenly looking flustered. "Furthermore," Bo said, his eyes locking on Alexandra, "we have evidence of a second property, purchased with marital funds, but held in the name of Mr. Julius Thornton. This constitutes a fraudulent conveyance of a marital asset." Alexandra opened her mouth to speak, but Bo cut her off. "And finally, we have this." He placed a small digital audio player on the table and pressed play. Alexandra's voice filled the silent room, crisp and clear. "A strong woman has to be willing to guide his hand, even guide his own pen, for the good of the family." The color drained from Alexandra's face. She looked like she'd been struck. Kyle stared at his mother, a look of pure, unadulterated panic dawning in his eyes. "That recording," Bo stated, "is Mrs. Alexandra Thornton confessing to felony forgery, admitting to falsifying Mr. Thornton's signature on documents to illegally transfer funds from their son's educational trust." The other lawyer looked at his clients, his jaw slack. "Is this true?" he whispered, horrified. Before they could answer, Bo gestured to the door. "We also have witnesses. Mr. Julius Thornton is prepared to testify that his mother coerced him into putting the fraudulent property in his name, and Mrs. Paige Thornton is prepared to testify about years of financial manipulation she has witnessed. It was a complete rout, an ambush. They had walked in expecting to crush me, to finalize my erasure. Instead, they were sitting in the wreckage of their lives, and they hadn't even seen it coming." The mediator, who had been reading through the first few pages of our filing, looked up. She took off her glasses and looked at Kyle and Alexandra with an expression of profound disappointment. She cleared her throat. "Given these new filings, which include evidence of significant hidden assets, fraudulent conveyance, and potential criminal activity, the initial offer is not only rejected but is frankly insulting." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. "Based on a preliminary review of the assets Mrs. Thornton has uncovered," she continued, her voice level and final, "and accounting for punitive damages related to the fraud, it appears Mrs. Thornton will be awarded no less than 70% of all community assets, including the family home, which will be awarded to her as the primary custodial parent. The fallout was swift and brutal. News doesn't leak in their world, it floods. Cassandra, true to her word, orchestrated the narrative with surgical precision. Anonymous tips, backed by carefully selected, non-incriminating documents, found their way to the right industry bloggers and social columnists. The story wasn't just about a messy divorce. It was about embezzlement, fraud, and a powerful family matriarch stealing from her own grandson. Within a week, Kyle was suspended from his job pending an internal investigation. The client leads he was so proud of had already dried up thanks to my earlier work, but this was a public shaming. His company, obsessed with its public image, couldn't tolerate the stain. Alexandra fared no better. Her exclusive social club, a place where she had reigned as a queen bee for 2 decades, quietly revoked her membership, citing a violation of their ethics clause. The charity board she sat on requested her immediate resignation. The phone calls she made went unanswered. Their world, built on the fragile foundation of reputation, crumbled to dust. 2 weeks after the mediation, armed with a court order granting me temporary exclusive use of the family home, I moved back in. Stefan was with me. The reunion had been quiet, just a long hug in the doorway of my small apartment before we packed his things. He was confused, but he knew he was safe with me. Walking back into that house was surreal. It was legally mine for now, but it felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I didn't gloat. I didn't redecorate or throw their remaining things onto the lawn. That would have been their style, not mine. My revenge was quieter, more complete. I simply starved them of the one thing they craved above all else: control. I changed the locks. I had their mail forwarded to Alexandra's address. I lived my life, calmly and methodically, in the space they had tried to rip away from me. One afternoon, I did something I hadn't planned. I drove to the new house, the one Kyle had bought with Talia Cox. I found the address from the property records Cassandra had sent me. It was a beautiful home in a new development, the kind of place designed for perfect, happy families. Talia was in the front yard, watering a bed of newly planted flowers. She looked up as I approached, a flicker of recognition and fear in her eyes. She was younger than me, pretty, with a hopeful expression that was already starting to look strained. "You're Laurel," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I replied, my voice even. "I just wanted to see the house my money helped buy." Tears welled in her eyes. "He told me you were already divorced," she whispered. "He said it was finalized months ago, that you were unwell, that you'd moved back to your hometown." I looked at this woman, another victim in the web of Kyle's and Alexandra's lies, and I felt a surprising pang of something that wasn't anger. It was a distant, cold pity. They had used her, just as they had used me, as they had used Julius. She was just another prop for the life Kyle wanted to project. "He lied," I said simply. It was all that needed to be said. I could have destroyed her. I could have named her in the divorce proceedings as a homewrecker, dragged her through the mud, and made her life a living hell. But that would have been a chaotic, emotional act. My plan was precise. She wasn't the target. She was just collateral damage. My fight was with the architects of my pain. I smiled, a small, genuine smile of dismissal. "Good luck with him," I said, and walked away, leaving her standing among her flowers in the ruins of the future she thought she had. The final act came a month later. Beautran called me. His voice was grim. "Laurel, the district attorney's office has reviewed the evidence from the mediation, specifically the documents from the family trust and the audio recording." I held my breath. "They've issued a warrant," he said, "for Alexandra Thornton, on charges of felony fraud and embezzlement. That evening, I was making dinner for Stefan when I saw the news report on my tablet. It was a short segment, but it was devastating. There was Alexandra, the untouchable matriarch, being led from her mansion in handcuffs. She tried to hide her face from the cameras, but there was no hiding the look of pure, uncomprehending shock as the officer guided her into the back of a police car. The Queen had been deposed. The dust has settled now, but the landscape is forever changed. The divorce was finalized quickly after Alexandra's arrest. Kyle, stripped of his mother's influence and financial backing, was a hollowed-out version of the man I once knew. He didn't fight. He signed everything Beau put in front of him, a ghost in a designer suit. He lost his job, his reputation, and the shiny new life he'd tried to build with Talia. She left him, unsurprisingly, the moment the full scope of his financial ruin became clear. I am financially secure. More than secure. I have the house, sole custody of Stefan, and a business that continues to thrive in the shadows. Alexandra, after a humiliating legal battle, took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence. She's serving 2 years in a low-security federal prison. Julius and Paige moved their family to the West Coast, a quiet exodus from the Thornton name and the wreckage it now represented. We exchanged polite, infrequent texts. They got out, and I'm glad for them. But there's a cost to setting the world on fire, even when the world deserves to burn. Some nights, I sit in the quiet of this big, silent house and feel the weight of what I did. It wasn't just a victory, it was a demolition. I feel an isolation that is sharp and profound. The ruthlessness it took to fight back, to orchestrate their downfall with such cold precision, has left its mark on me. I see it in the mirror sometimes, a hardness in my eyes that wasn't there before. Cassandra came over last week with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. We sat on the back patio, watching the sun set. She's been my rock, my co-conspirator, my conscience when I needed one. You're thinking about it again, she said, not looking at me. It was necessary, I said, more to myself than to her. Everything I did. It was justified. It was, she agreed, but necessary things can still be heavy. You fought monsters, Laurel. It's okay to be tired of the dark. She took a sip of her wine. You know, you should write it all down. Your story. Not for anyone else, just for you. Get it out of your head. She smirked. Or, post it online for a bunch of strangers to read. They eat this stuff up. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that felt foreign and wonderful. The thought is tempting, to lay it all out, anonymously, and let the world see what happens when you push a good woman too far. The other day, Stefan and I were cleaning out the garage. In a dusty box, I found the old ceramic cookie jar we painted together. Tucked inside, forgotten, was the single $10 bill and the 2 ones they had left me. $12. I held the crumpled bills in my hand, the paper soft and worn. It felt like an artifact from another lifetime, a relic of a woman who no longer exists. I started with $12 and no home. Now I own 3 properties, 2 shell companies, and a story no one dares repeat out loud. Funny thing, Karma. You think it's slow, but sometimes she carries your name.
I've always been the sensible one. It's a label you get when you're the kid who balances your checkbook at 16 and the adult who reads the fine print on a mortgage application for fun. My name is Brooke. I'm 42. I'm a forensic accountant. And for the last 18 years, I've built a life on the solid bedrock of predictability. My husband, Alvin, is 45. He's the charming one, the one who can talk his way into anything, and I'm the one who makes sure the foundations are sound. We have 2 kids, Viviana, who is 17 and buried in college applications, and Keith, who is 15 and thinks he's the next coding prodigy. Our life, from the outside, is a carefully curated picture of suburban success. Tonight, that picture started to crack. It began with a notice from Viviana's school tucked under a magnet on the fridge. It was a polite but firm reminder that the fall semester's final tuition installment was 10 days past due. I felt a prickle of annoyance. I'd given Alvin the check to mail 2 weeks ago. "Hey, Al," I called out from the kitchen. He was on the couch, scrolling through his phone with a half smile on his face. "Did you ever mail that tuition check for Viv?" He looked up, his smile not faltering. "Oh, hey. Yeah, I dropped it in the mail last week. Post office must be slow." He shrugged, a gesture so casual it should have been reassuring. It wasn't. "They sent a late notice," I said, holding up the paper. "Weird." "I'll call them tomorrow, sort it out," he said, his eyes already back on his phone. "Don't worry about it." But I do worry. That's my job. I worry about misplaced decimals, phantom invoices, and money that vanishes into thin air. I pay the bills in this house because I'm the sensible one, but I'd let him handle this one payment because he'd insisted. A small, stupid detail. Later that night, after the kids were in their rooms and the house was quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It wasn't just the check. There had been other little things. A credit card payment that was slightly higher than my projections, a vague answer about a withdrawal from our personal savings. Alvin always had a plausible story, a charming deflection. For years, I'd accepted them. I decided to do a quick review of the main accounts before bed, just to settle my nerves. Our primary accounts looked fine, if a little lower than I'd like. But the college fund, I hadn't looked at the detailed statements for that in a while. The fund was a collection of mutual funds and bonds, an account we'd started the year Viviana was born. It was supposed to be our kids' launch pad, the one thing we never, ever touched. The new statements were all online, but the original account setup and the first decade of records were archived on my old laptop. I pulled the heavy machine from the back of my office closet, blew dust off the lid, and waited for it to groan to life. I navigated through ancient folders, my muscle memory still intact. I found the investment portfolio and opened the earliest archived statements. The numbers were all there, a steady history of contributions and growth. I started scrolling forward, year by year, my eyes scanning the transaction logs. Everything looked normal. Deposits in, dividends reinvested. Then I hit a statement from almost exactly 10 years ago. My breath caught. There, on a single line dated October 17th, was a wire transfer out, a withdrawal, $15,000. It was a clean, stark number that didn't belong. My heart started a low, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. We had never discussed a withdrawal. Not for a new roof, not for a car, not for anything. The recipient description was brief. B. Stewart. My mind raced. B. Stewart? It had to be a mistake, a bank error. But the transaction was confirmed, the funds gone. I frantically scanned the next few months of statements, then the next year's. I was looking for the corresponding deposit, the sign that this was a temporary loan, a mistake that was quickly rectified. There was nothing. The money was never put back. $15,000 wired to my husband's younger brother, Bruno, 10 years ago. Siphoned directly from the account, meant to secure our children's future, and never replaced. The room felt suddenly cold. This wasn't a bank error. This was a secret. And for a woman whose entire career was built on finding them, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that this was only the beginning. Sleep didn't come that night. The glowing screen of the old laptop burned the image of that $15,000 withdrawal into my mind. One transaction could be a mistake, a desperate one-time loan for a family emergency that Alvin was too ashamed to mention. I wanted to believe that, but my professional instincts, the ones that had sniffed out multi-million-dollar fraud schemes from a single misplaced invoice, were screaming at me. For the next 3 nights, I lived a double life. By day, I was a wife and mother, making packed lunches, asking about homework, and smiling at Alvin across the dinner table. But after he went to bed, my real work began. I didn't use the old laptop again. It was too slow, too risky. I used my work machine, the one with encrypted drives and firewalls, and created a new project folder. I labeled it Stewart Education Fund Audit. It felt cold, clinical. It felt right. I logged into the investment portal. We had joint access, but I was the only one who ever really checked it. Alvin trusted me to handle it. The irony was a bitter pill. I started downloading every monthly and quarterly statement, going back 10 years. I worked backward from the present day, my mouse clicking with a grim rhythm in the silent house. The first withdrawal wasn't the last. It was just the first domino. 2 years later, another transfer, $8,500. The memo line was blank. 6 months after that, $12,000, coded as a capital loss that didn't match any market downturn. Then they started getting more frequent. 5,000 here, 3,000 there. A steady, methodical siphoning, like 1,000 tiny cuts bleeding the account dry. I built a spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Each line item was a date, an amount, and a destination. Every single withdrawal, without exception, went to an account under the name Bruno Stewart. I cross-referenced the dates with our old family calendars and my own memory. That $12,000, it coincided with the month Bruno launched a failed food truck business, the $8,500, just before he took a lavish trip to Thailand, posting pictures of himself on a beach while we were fixing a leak in our roof. The total was staggering. By the time I got to the most recent statement, the number at the bottom of my spreadsheet was a monster. Over the last decade, Alvin had funneled more than $180,000 from our children's college fund to his brother. The money was one thing. I'm a numbers person. I could quantify the loss. It was the deception that hollowed me out. Many of the online transfers required a digital authorization, a box you check to confirm you have the consent of the other account holder. He had clicked that box, over and over again. He had forged my consent, using the trust I'd given him as a weapon against our family. I remembered all his little lies, the white-hot shame of them now searing my memory. The bonuses that were smaller than expected, the market dips that were worse than they looked. All of it was a lie, a smokescreen to cover the sound of him robbing our children. The breaking point came at dinner on Thursday. Viviana was buzzing with excitement, her laptop open to a university website. "Mom, my counselor said my early decision application for Georgetown is strong," she said, her eyes shining. "But she said they'd look at the whole picture, including the financial aid forms we have to submit. We're okay, right? We can show we're stable?" I looked across the table at Alvin, who was smiling at his daughter, nodding like the proudest father in the world. My throat closed up. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of the table. "Of course, sweetie," I managed to say, my voice a strained whisper. "We're fine." That night, I couldn't stop. I dug deeper, not just in the investment account, but in our old shared email archives. I searched for Bruno's name, hoping to find some explanation, some context. I scrolled through years of birthday wishes and holiday plans, and then I found it. An email from Bruno to Alvin dated a week before that very first withdrawal 10 years ago. The subject line was "Quick question." Bruno's message was short, asking if Alvin was sure about borrowing the money. "What if Brooke finds out?" he'd written. I clicked on the thread, my heart pounding. Alvin's reply was just one line, a line that snuffed out the last ember of hope that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. "It's fine. It's family money. Brooke will never know." The words "Brooke will never know" echoed in the silent house. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, my body rigid with a coldness that had nothing to do with the late hour. For a moment, I felt nothing at all, just a vast, hollow space where 18 years of trust used to be. Then, the dam broke. I stumbled to the bathroom, locked the door, and slid down to the cold tile floor. I didn't scream. The sounds that came out of me were ragged animal things, choked sobs that I muffled with my hands so I wouldn't wake the children whose futures had been sold off piece by piece. I let myself have one night to fall apart. One night to be the betrayed wife, the fool, the sensible woman who hadn't seen the rot in her own foundation. When the sun came up, I washed my face, put on my makeup like armor, and went downstairs to make coffee. I was done grieving. It was time for an audit. I waited until Saturday afternoon, when Keith was at a friend's house and Viviana was at the library. Alvin was in the living room watching golf. I walked in and placed my work laptop on the coffee table in front of him. I didn't say a word. I just opened it to the spreadsheet. The columns were color-coded. Red for withdrawals, black for dates, a running total in a sickening shade of crimson at the bottom. He glanced at it, then at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What's this, some work thing?" "This is the college fund," I said, my voice flat and even. "Or what's left of it. I've documented $183,450 in unauthorized transfers to Bruno over the last 10 years. The color drained from his face. He looked from the screen to me, his charming smile finally gone, replaced by the panicked look of a cornered animal. "Brooke, what are you talking about? Those were loans. He was in a tight spot." "A tight spot that lasted a decade?" I clicked over to the email. His email. "A Brooke will never know." "Does that sound like a loan to you, Alvin?" He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "You went through my emails? Why were you snooping?" The deflection was so predictable, so cowardly, it was almost insulting. "Because our daughter's tuition payment was late," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to control it. "Because you've been lying to my face for years. This isn't about snooping. This is about theft. You stole from our children." "I didn't steal," he insisted, his voice a desperate whine. "It's family. You don't understand. Bruno needed help. Dad would have killed me if I'd said no. I meant to tell you. I was going to pay it all back." The excuses were a waterfall of weakness, and I held up a hand to stop them. "I'm done talking to you about this," I said. "We're going to see your parents tomorrow. I want to hear them defend this." The Sunday lunch at my in-laws' house was a masterclass in manipulation. I laid out the facts as calmly as I could, presenting the numbers without emotion. Clifford, Alvin's father, listened with a stony expression, his hands steepled in front of him. Susan, his mother, just stirred her iced tea, a faint, pitying smile on her face. Alvin sat beside me, silent and shrunken. When I finished, Clifford cleared his throat. "Family helps family, Brooke. That's the end of it. Bruno had some bad luck. Alvin did the right thing." "The right thing?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. "He forged my consent and drained our kids' education fund. There is nothing right about that." Susan finally looked at me, her eyes cool. "You've always been a bit dramatic. It's just money. It comes and goes. If the kids are really smart, they'll find scholarships." I stared at her, speechless. The casual cruelty of it, the complete dismissal of Viviana and Keith's hard work, of our shared dreams for them, was staggering. I looked at Alvin, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to defend his own children, to defend me. He just stared at his plate. He said nothing. In his silence, he made his choice. He chose them. I drove home alone, defeated. The gaslighting had been so total, so absolute, that I almost started to doubt my own sanity. I walked into my home office, the scene of the crime, and sank into my chair. My fight was gone. They had won. My eyes drifted across my desk, over piles of paperwork and a half-empty coffee mug, and landed on a small, crisp rectangle of cardstock in a holder. My business card. Brooke Stewart, CFE, forensic accountant. A cold, clarifying rage washed over me. They had treated me like a hysterical wife. They had miscalculated. The wife was gone. They were dealing with the accountant now. And I was about to conduct the most important audit of my life. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a case. The drive home from my in-laws' house was the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. The grief was gone, burned away by the cold fire of Susan's condescending smile and Clifford's moral bankruptcy. I spent the rest of that Sunday in my office, not as a wife, but as a professional. I wasn't just auditing the college fund anymore. I was building a case. The first thing I did was call Remington Clark. Remy and I have been best friends since we were paralegals together, before I went back to school for accounting. She's now a partner at a boutique law firm, and her mind is as sharp as a shard of glass. "Hey, it's me," I said when she answered. "I need to buy you a drink. And also pick your brain on a hypothetical financial misappropriation case." "Hypothetical my ass," she said, her voice warm but knowing. "What did he do?" We met at a quiet bar downtown the next evening. Over a glass of wine, I laid it all out. The transfers, the forged consents, the gaslighting from his parents. I kept my voice steady, presenting the facts as if I were briefing a client. Remy listened without interrupting, her expression growing harder with every detail. "Okay," she said when I finished. "First, you need to move half of whatever is left in your joint accounts into a new account in your name only, right now. Tonight. Second, this isn't just a divorce case waiting to happen, Brooke. This is fraud. What he did with the digital signatures is a federal offense." "I'm not there yet," I said, shaking my head. "I don't know what I want, but I need to document everything. Properly." "Good," she nodded. "Build your file. Scan every statement, every email. Create a timeline. When you're ready to make a move, you need a fortress of evidence. No loopholes, no deniability." Her advice solidified my resolve. This wouldn't be a messy, emotional fight. It would be a precise, surgical strike, executed with the full weight of documented proof. Walking out of the bar, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Fiona. Mom gave me your number. I'm in town for a few weeks. Would be nice to see you." My sister, Fiona. We hadn't spoken in almost 5 years. Our last conversation had been a screaming match over our parents' estate after our father died. She'd accused me of being a cold, controlling bean counter because I'd insisted on a formal appraisal of the house, while she wanted to just trust that our mother's valuation was fair. I'd called her naive and financially reckless. We'd both said things that couldn't be unsaid, and the silence that followed had stretched into years. Seeing her name on my screen felt like a ghost walking through the room. Part of me wanted to delete the message, to keep that door firmly closed. But the betrayal I was facing now cast our old fight in a new light. I had been controlling, yes, but only because I'd seen how easily trust could be weaponized in a family. My hypervigilance, the very trait Fiona resented, was a defense mechanism I'd built long ago. I texted back. "I'm free for coffee Thursday." We met at a small cafe, the air between us thick with unspoken history. Fiona looked older, her face etched with lines of worry I didn't recognize. She told me she was between jobs, staying with our mom for a bit. "Look, Brooke," she started, twisting a napkin in her hands. "I know I was a jerk. You were right about the house. Mom ended up selling it for way less than it was worth 6 months later because she took some bad advice. You were just trying to protect us. I get that now." The apology, so long overdue, cracked something open in me. I told her everything about Alvin, Bruno, the money, about the meeting with his parents. As I spoke, I saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. She had seen this movie before, just with a different cast. "They're a clan, Brooke," she said softly when I was done. "It's their loyalty against yours. You can't win that fight on their terms." Her words were a strange comfort. She wasn't just my estranged sister anymore. She was someone who understood the unique pain of being betrayed by the people who are supposed to have your back. That night, I went back to my secret project with renewed focus. I purchased a license for the same case management software we used at my firm. I began uploading the scanned bank statements, the emails, the spreadsheet I'd built. I created a new file, a formal report that would be the foundation of my case. I typed the title, the words appearing on the screen with chilling finality: Misappropriation of Funds, Family Account, Stewart. With the framework of my report built, I moved on to the next phase, tracing the money. It wasn't enough to know the funds were gone. I needed to know where they went and what they were used for. I needed to paint a picture of Bruno's lifestyle, funded by his niece and nephew's future. This required a deeper dive, one that went beyond our family bank accounts. My job gives me access to certain corporate and public record databases. It's all perfectly legal, the kind of routine background research we do on entities in fraud cases. I started with Bruno. He'd had a string of failed businesses over the years, each one launched with a flurry of excitement and ending in a quiet fizzle. His most recent venture was a consulting firm, Stewart Strategic Solutions, LLC, a name so blandly corporate it was almost comical. I pulled the LLC's formation documents. It was a shell, registered to a PO box with no real office, but it had a business bank account, and I suspected that's where Alvin had been funneling some of the larger payments, disguised as business expenses. I couldn't legally access his private bank records, but I could follow public breadcrumbs. I found records of lease agreements for luxury cars, all under the LLC. I found state tax liens for unpaid payroll taxes from a defunct t-shirt company he'd run 5 years prior. The most damning discovery came from a county record search. 2 years ago, Bruno had secured a line of credit to finance a ridiculously overpriced condominium. I couldn't see the full application, but the public lien filing listed the collateral he'd used to secure the loan. My blood ran cold when I read it. He had listed as an asset and pledged as collateral a portion of a trust. The filing didn't name the trust, but the numbers were familiar. He had leveraged our children's education fund, or at least the portion he believed he was entitled to get a bank loan. This wasn't just immoral anymore. This was bank fraud. He had misrepresented assets that were never his to begin with. The deception was so layered, so brazen, it took my breath away. Alvin hadn't just given his brother money for rent and bills. He had enabled a complex financial charade, making our children the unwitting financiers of Bruno's delusions of grandeur. The strain of my secret investigation was starting to wear on me. I was jumpy, irritable, and sleeping in the guest room under the pretense of a cold. The kids noticed the tension. Alvin and I were polite but distant, our conversations limited to household logistics. One evening, Keith came into my office while I was working on the report. He was holding his school-issued tablet, a worried frown on his face. "Mom, I got another email about the FAFSA deadline," he said, showing me the screen. "It says we need to submit our financial info soon for scholarship considerations. Are we in trouble?" Viv said her tuition was late. I looked at my son, his face so open and trusting, and felt a surge of protective fury so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I had to lie to him, to the child whose money I was trying to recover. "No, honey, we're not in trouble," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "Your dad and I are just reorganizing some of our investments. It's boring adult stuff. I'll handle all the forms, don't you worry." He seemed satisfied with that and wandered off. I shut my laptop, my hands shaking with rage. Lying to my own child to cover for his father's betrayal was a new level of hell. That was the last straw. I needed a confession. I needed to hear it from Alvin himself, without the filter of his parents' influence. That night, I confronted him again, but this time I was prepared. I turned on the voice recorder app on my phone and left it sitting face up on the kitchen counter before he came in. "We need to talk about the collateral for Bruno's condo," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Alvin froze, a deer in the headlights. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about him listing the kid's trust as an asset to get a bank loan. Did you know about that?" He sank into a chair, the fight completely gone from him. He looked pathetic, a middle-aged man hollowed out by his own weakness. "He was going to lose the place," he mumbled, not looking at me. "Mom and Dad, they were so disappointed in him. They said if I didn't help him get on his feet, they'd cut me off from everything. The business, the inheritance, I was scared. I did it for us, Brooke, to protect our future." "Our future?" I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "You set our children's future on fire to keep your parents from being disappointed in your screw-up, brother. You didn't do this for us. You did this for you." I picked up my phone, stopped the recording, and saved the file. He didn't even notice. He just sat there, staring at the floor, a man who had sold his soul for a pat on the head from his father. Alvin's recorded confession was the final piece of evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with a feverish intensity, weaving every thread of deceit into an undeniable tapestry of fraud. The report grew, page by page, filled with scanned documents, annotated bank statements, timelines, and transcripts. It was a monument to a decade of lies. When I printed the final version, it was 110 pages thick. It was methodical, irrefutable, and utterly damning. But the report was only part 1 of my plan. Part 2 was the invoice. Using a template from my firm, I drafted a formal demand for repayment. It wasn't just a simple request for the stolen principal. I was a professional, and this was a professional engagement. I calculated the interest on the misappropriated funds, compounded annually at a conservative but fair market rate. Then I added a separate line item, forensic accounting and case preparation services. I logged every hour I'd spent on this investigation, the late nights, the database searches, the document analysis, and billed it at my standard professional rate of $350 an hour. The final amount was shocking, even to me. The principal, the interest, and my fees brought the total to just over $280,000. It was a cold, hard number that represented not just the missing money, but the cost of the betrayal. To make sure it was legally sound, I took a long lunch and met with my boss, Earl Newton. Earl is a 50-year-old bear of a man who has seen every kind of financial crime imaginable. I gave him the 30,000-foot view, framing it as a potential case for a friend. He read through the draft invoice, his expression grim. "This is airtight," he said, tapping the paper. "You've documented everything. The interest calculation is standard practice for recovering embezzled funds. And billing for your time, it's aggressive, but you're quantifying the labor cost of uncovering the fraud. It's defensible. Your friend has built a hell of a case." He looked at me over the top of his glasses. "You okay, Brooke?" "I will be," I said, and for the first time, I believed it. That weekend, Fiona came over. The house was quiet, the kids were with friends, and Alvin was, according to a terse text message, helping Bruno with something. We sat in the kitchen, the massive report lying on the table between us. Fiona flipped through the pages, her eyes wide. "My God, Brooke. This is a weapon. It's a statement of fact," I corrected her. "You should send this to the DA," she said, her voice hot with anger on my behalf. "You should leak it to the local paper. Let everyone see what kind of people the Stewarts really are. Burn it all down." I shook my head. No, that's chaos. I don't want chaos, Fee. I want accountability. I want them to understand in precise financial terms the exact cost of what they did. Vengeance served hot is messy. I was planning to serve it ice cold on a spreadsheet. My plan had a deadline: Thanksgiving. The holiday had always been a command performance at my in-laws' house, a day of forced smiles and passive-aggressive commentary from Susan. This year would be different. It wouldn't be a celebration of family. It would be a reckoning. The night before, I assembled the final packages. I had the master report professionally bound in a sleek black binder. On the spine, I affixed a simple label maker sticker with a single word, justice. I made 4 additional copies, one for each of them, Clifford, Susan, Bruno, and Alvin. I slipped each copy into a crisp manila envelope. Finally, I printed the invoice on heavy bond paper and placed it in its own envelope, addressed to Alvin. I walked over to the large family calendar hanging in the kitchen. The square for Thursday, November 24th, was marked with Thanksgiving at the Stewarts in my own cheerful handwriting from months ago. I took a thick black marker and drew a hard, clean line through the words. Underneath, in sharp block letters, I wrote, Judgment Day. Thanksgiving Day arrived grey and cold. The drive to my in-laws' house was silent. Alvin tried to make small talk, but my one-word answers eventually killed the effort. Viviana and Keith were in the back seat, headphones on, oblivious to the fact that our family was about to be detonated. I carried a large, structured tote bag, the weight of the binder and envelopes inside feeling both heavy and grounding. The moment we walked in, the cloying warmth and the smell of roasting turkey felt like a suffocating lie. Susan greeted us with air kisses, her eyes flicking over my simple black dress with faint disapproval. Bruno was already there, loud and obnoxious, telling some exaggerated story about a business deal that was about to close. Clifford stood by the fireplace, the patriarch surveying his domain. We went through the motions of polite conversation. I accepted a glass of wine and held it like a prop, the liquid untouched. I watched my children interact with the family who had so casually stolen from them, and a calm, protective certainty settled over me. I was doing the right thing. When Susan called everyone to the dining room, my heart began a slow, steady beat. The table was perfectly set with her best china, a Norman Rockwell painting of family harmony. I made sure I was seated directly across from Alvin, with a clear view of his parents and brother. Clifford stood at the head of the table, raising his wine glass. A toast, he began, his voice booming with self-satisfaction. To family, to loyalty, to knowing that no matter what happens in the world, we will always be there for each other. It's the most important thing. It sometimes requires sacrifice, but it's what makes us strong. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, a clear, smug message. He thought he had won. He thought I had been silenced. As everyone raised their glasses, I remained seated. I calmly reached into my tote bag, my movements deliberate. I pulled out the sleek black binder and placed it in the center of the table with a soft, definitive thud. The clinking of glasses stopped. Every eye turned to me. I'm glad you brought up sacrifice, Clifford, I said, my voice even and clear, cutting through the sudden silence. Because I want to talk about the sacrifices that have been made for this family, specifically the ones made by my children without their knowledge or consent. I stood up and picked up the manila envelopes. For the last 10 years, Alvin, with the full knowledge and encouragement of his parents, has been systematically draining Viviana and Keith's college fund to finance Bruno's failed businesses and lifestyle. A collective gasp went through the room. Viviana and Keith stared at me, then at their father, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. I've prepared a full forensic audit of the accounts, I continued, my voice never wavering. I walked around the table and placed an envelope in front of Clifford, then Susan, then a stunned-looking Bruno. This is for you to read at your leisure. It details every unauthorized transfer, every forged signature, and every lie told to cover it up. It also includes evidence of probable bank fraud regarding Bruno's condominium. Susan dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, red wine splashing across the cream-colored rug like blood. No one moved. I returned to my spot and picked up the last envelope. I looked directly at my husband. His face was ashen, his eyes pleading with me. I felt nothing. "And this, Alvin," I said, dropping the invoice onto his dinner plate, "is for you." His hands trembled as he opened it. His eyes scanned the page, widening in disbelief at the final number. Bruno leaned over to look, and his jaw literally fell open. "This invoice," I announced to the room, "is for the full principal of $183,450, plus compounded interest, plus my professional fee for the 140 hours I spent uncovering this scheme. The total amount due is $287.25. I looked at my children. "I promise to secure your future," I said, my voice softening for the first time. "And I keep my promises." I picked up my purse and my tote bag. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum of shock and shame. "You have 30 days to respond with a legally binding repayment plan," I said, turning to leave. "If you fail to do so, this report will be forwarded to the IRS, the district attorney, and the bank that holds Bruno's fraudulent loan. Consider this an early Christmas gift." I walked out of the dining room and didn't look back. I was halfway to the front door when I heard Viviana's chair scrape back. A moment later, she and Keith were standing right behind me. I left before dessert. My kids came with me. The 30-day deadline I gave the Stewarts passed in a blur of upheaval. The day after Thanksgiving, I moved out. I found a small, clean apartment for rent, and Viviana and Keith helped me pack our essential belongings. They didn't ask a lot of questions at first. They were quiet, watchful, processing the implosion of their lives. But as we set up their new rooms, Viviana turned to me, the audit report I'd given her a copy of in her hands. "You did all this for us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a superhero, Mom." In that moment, seeing the respect and understanding in my children's eyes, I knew I had made the right choice. Alvin didn't fight me on anything. He was a ghost, hollowed out by the public exposure of his weakness. He moved into Bruno's fraudulently financed condo, two brothers marooned on an island of their own making. My lawyer, guided by Remy, filed for divorce on grounds of financial malfeasance, using my report as the primary exhibit. The legal battle was surprisingly short. On the 29th day, a check arrived via a courier from Clifford's lawyer. It was for the full amount on the invoice. There was no letter of apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just the money. Clifford chose to pay for the problem to go away, a transactional solution for a moral failing. It was exactly what I expected. The money went directly into a new trust, one in my name only, for the benefit of my children. The fallout for the Stewarts was quiet but catastrophic. I never leaked the report, but secrets that toxic have a way of seeping out. Rumors started to circulate in their social and business circles. Clifford's reputation as an upstanding family man took a significant hit. Susan became a recluse. Bruno's condo went into foreclosure when the bank, likely tipped off by an anonymous source, called his loan. His credit was destroyed, and his consulting business, which was already a sham, evaporated completely. Alvin, stripped of the family safety net he'd sacrificed his integrity for, was left with nothing. My life, in contrast, began to rebuild. The apartment was smaller than our house, but it was ours, a sanctuary free of secrets. Fiona became a regular presence. She'd come over with groceries, help Keith with his coding projects, and sit with me for hours, just talking. The 5 years of silence between us melted away, replaced by a bond forged in the shared understanding of family fractures. One evening, she brought over a brochure. "I was thinking," she said, sliding it across the table, "all that work you did, you could teach other women how to do that. How to protect themselves." The brochure was for a non-profit that provided financial literacy resources for victims of domestic abuse. We started volunteering together, and soon we were drafting a proposal for a new initiative. A workshop series focused on forensic accounting for personal finances, designed to empower women to spot the red flags of financial abuse. We decided to call it the Ledger Foundation. Justice didn't heal the wound of Alvin's betrayal. No amount of money could erase the memory of his lies or the years of trust he'd incinerated. But it did something else. It gave me my power back. It showed my children that integrity is non-negotiable and that you must always, always fight for what is right, especially when it's hard. The following autumn, as the leaves began to turn, Viviana received her early acceptance letter from Georgetown. We celebrated with pizza on the floor of our living room, the three of us laughing until our sides hurt. The pain of the last year was still there, a faint scar, but it was surrounded by new, healthier tissue. We were healing. Next Thanksgiving, there will be no grand family dinner, no forced smiles or bitter toasts. It will be just the three of us in our little apartment. We'll eat takeout and watch movies, and I'll help my kids fill out their scholarship applications. Not because they need the money anymore, but because the forms ask them to write about a time they've demonstrated personal strength and overcome adversity. They have one hell of a story to tell. Next Thanksgiving, I'll be giving my kids scholarships for resilience.
The scent of my mother's overcooked pot roast hung heavy in the air, a familiar smell of forced family obligation. My name is Tamara. I'm 35, and for as long as I can remember, Sunday dinners have been less about connection and more about command performances. Tonight was no different, except for the electric tension coming off my parents. My father, Emerson, kept clearing his throat, while my mother, Patricia, arranged and rearranged her silverware with sharp, deliberate clicks. My brother, Benson, sat across from me, a smug little smile playing on his lips. At 33, he still had the unearned confidence of a teenager who'd never faced a real consequence. "Tamara," my mother began, placing her fork down with a note of finality. "Your father and I have made a decision. It's about the house." I took a slow sip of water, my eyes fixed on her. I already knew where this was going. Benson's latest genius idea, some kind of artisanal, ethically sourced, blockchain enabled coffee subscription box, needed another infusion of cash. His last 5 ventures had ended the same way, with my parents liquidating a retirement fund or taking out a loan. They were running out of things to sell. "Benson has a wonderful opportunity," my father chimed in, his voice attempting a cheerful tone that landed somewhere near pathetic. "A real game changer this time. But it requires some seed capital to get off the ground. We've had the house appraised," my mother said, cutting to the chase. She's always been the enforcer. "The market is incredible right now. We'd be foolish not to take advantage of it." I didn't say anything. I just watched them, a team of two against an audience of one. Benson leaned forward, his expression turning earnest. It was a look he'd perfected over the years, the one he used right before he asked for something that wasn't his. "This is for the family, Tam," he said softly. "Once this takes off, I'll take care of everyone. You know that." I almost laughed. The only person Benson had ever taken care of was himself. My mother sighed, a theatrical sound of maternal sacrifice. "We know this is a big change, honey, but we need to sell." The realtor said we could get it listed by the end of the month. She looked at me, her gaze clear and unpitying. "You'll have 30 days to find a new place and move out." There it was, not a request, but a verdict. My home, the place I had lived in for most of my life, the roof I had single-handedly kept over their heads, was being sold out from under me to fund my brother's latest fantasy. They spoke as if I were a tenant whose lease had expired, a minor inconvenience in their grand plan. My mind drifted back 12 years. I was 23, fresh out of college with my first real job and a credit score I'd guarded like a dragon's hoard. I'd come home one night to find my parents sobbing at this very table. The bank was foreclosing. A series of my father's bad investments, which they'd hidden from me, had finally caught up to them. They were days away from being homeless. They begged me. Patricia, who never asked for anything she couldn't demand, wept and pleaded for me to help. My father looked broken. They had no options. Their credit was destroyed. But I had an option. I had a steady income and a clean financial history. That night, in a frantic rush of paperwork at a 24-hour notary, they signed the deed over to me. I took on the mortgage, my name replacing theirs on the official county records. I saved this house. I paid the bills, handled the upkeep, and slowly, painstakingly, brought the mortgage back into good standing. For 12 years, I had been the silent, unacknowledged owner, and now, sitting at the same table, they delivered my eviction notice. They looked at me, waiting for the tears, the arguments, the protestations they could swat away with guilt and appeals to family loyalty. I gave them none of it. I just nodded slowly, a calm spreading through me that was so cold it felt like ice in my veins. I met my mother's gaze, then my father's, and finally my brother's. Their expressions shifted from tense expectation to relieved satisfaction. They saw compliance. They saw the path to their goal clearing before them. They saw the same old Tamara, the one who always folded. Okay, I said, my voice even. I understand. Relief washed over their faces. My mother even managed a tight, triumphant smile. Good, she said. We knew you'd be reasonable. They had no idea what was coming. They had relied on my silence and my sense of duty for so long that they'd forgotten the most important detail of all. They'd forgotten whose name was on the deed. They forgot. But I never did. The pot roast sat like a lead weight in my stomach all night. I didn't sleep. The moment the sun cast a grayish light through my bedroom window, I was up. I walked down the hall to my home office, the one room in the house that felt entirely mine, and knelt before the small fireproof safe tucked under my desk. The combination was a series of dates, none of which my family would ever remember. With a soft click, the door opened. Inside, nestled between my passport and a few savings bonds, was a thick manila envelope. My hands were steady as I pulled it out. The paper was slightly yellowed, the ink from the notary's stamp a little faded, but the signatures were clear. Emerson Sutton, Patricia Sutton, and below them, Tamara Sutton, the quitclaim deed dated 12 years ago. Proof. An hour later, I was sitting across from my best friend Nicole in her sleek downtown office. At 36, she was a partner at her firm, a shark in a blazer who had been telling me for years that my family was using me. She took the deed from my hands, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the paper as she read. So, the chickens have finally come home to roost, she said, her voice devoid of surprise. She'd heard every infuriating story about Benson's failed startups and my parents' endless financial support for him. They gave me 30 days, I said, the words tasting like ash. 30 days to get out of my own house. Nicole leaned back in her leather chair, her eyes scanning the document again. This is ironclad, Tam. Notarized, filed with the county clerk, everything by the book. They have no legal claim. None. I stared out her window at the bustling city below, my mind flashing back to the night that paper was signed. It wasn't a calm, orderly transaction in an office like this one. It was chaos. I was 23, and I'd found my parents in a state of panic I'd never seen before. Boxes were half packed, my mother's face stained with tears, my father looking like a ghost. It was just a temporary investment, a bridge loan, he'd stammered, referring to the money he'd lost. We were supposed to pay it back in a month. The bank is taking the house tomorrow. My mother had sobbed, grabbing my hands. Her grip was like a vice. Everything we've ever worked for, it's all gone. Benson, then 21, was nowhere to be found. He was probably out with friends, spending money they didn't have. The responsibility, as always, fell to me. It's just a formality. My father had insisted as they signed the papers on our dining room table, the notary looking on with a weary expression. Just to get the bank off our backs. We'll sort everything out, honey, we promise. They promised to pay me back for the mortgage payments. They promised it was temporary. They promised I was saving the family. 12 years of broken promises. They never paid me a dime, and soon enough the formality was forgotten. They went back to being the masters of the castle, and I became the live in daughter, the responsible one, the safety net they never had to acknowledge. Tamara, Nicole's voice pulled me back to the present. You with me? I blinked, the memory fading. Yeah, I'm here. Good, she said, a sharp, predatory glint in her eye. Because here's what we're going to do. We aren't going to argue with them. We aren't going to have some big dramatic family fight. We're going to use the law the same way they would have if the roles were reversed. She slid the deed back across the desk to me. This house is your asset. They are, legally speaking, tenants. Tenants who have never paid rent, I might add, so we are going to serve them with a formal notice of eviction. The word felt alien. Eviction. It was something that happened to other people, a word from news stories and dramas, not something you did to your own parents. But what had they just done to me? They'll fight it, I said quietly. Let them, Nicole replied, a thin, dangerous smile spreading across her face. Let them hire a lawyer and try to argue that the legal document they signed in a moment of desperation is somehow invalid. Let them try to explain to a judge why their daughter, who saved their home, should be the one thrown out on the street. They wanted to play with fire? Fine. Let's burn their whole world down. A thrill, hot and sharp, shot through me. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the last 12 years. It was about every time Benson got a new car while I was driving a 10-year-old sedan. Every time they praised his ambition while ignoring my stability. Every time I was the responsible one, the boring one, the one they could always count on and therefore never had to appreciate. Nicole leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Have the papers ready by Tuesday. Let's make them feel what you've felt for 12 years. Tuesday morning arrived with a deceptive calm. I made coffee, the familiar routine, a strange comfort against the storm I was about to unleash. At exactly 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. I knew it wasn't a package. Nicole had arranged for a professional process server, a neutral party, to deliver the news. I stayed in the kitchen, listening. I heard my father open the door, a confused murmur, and then the crisp sound of an envelope being handed over. Who is this for? He asked. Emerson and Patricia Sutton. A flat, professional voice replied. Silence. Then the click of the door closing. I heard the rustle of thick paper, followed by my father's sharp intake of breath. Patricia, he called out, his voice thin and strained. You need to see this. I walked into the living room, my coffee mug held in both hands. My mother was standing in her bathrobe, reading the document over my father's shoulder. The official letterhead, the bolded words, notice to vacate, the 30-day deadline. Her face went from pale confusion to a blotchy, furious red. Her head snapped up, her eyes locking on me. What is this? She hissed, snatching the papers from my father. Is this some kind of sick joke? It's not a joke, I said calmly. It's a legal notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The premises? She shrieked, the words dripping with venom. This is my home. We have lived here for 40 years. And 12 years ago, you signed it over to me, I reminded her, my voice unwavering. You seem to have forgotten that detail when you told me I had 30 days to leave. My father sank onto the couch, looking utterly defeated. Tamara, how could you? We're your family. You didn't seem to remember that on Sunday. I shot back. Family doesn't throw family out on the street to fund another one of Benson's pipe dreams. As if on cue, my brother's car screeched into the driveway. My mother must have called him the second she understood what was happening. A moment later, the front door flew open and Benson stormed in, his face a mask of rage. What the hell is this? He yelled, waving his phone. Mom just called me, hysterical. You're evicting them? Are you insane? He marched right up to me, getting in my space, trying to intimidate me the way he always had. I didn't flinch. I'm evicting the non paying tenants who live in my house, I said, my tone as cold as steel. That includes you, whenever you decide to crash here between failed business ventures. His anger faltered, replaced by that familiar manipulative earnestness. Tam, come on, this is us. Remember building forts in this living room? Remember when I defended you from that bully in middle school? The memory was so twisted it was almost funny. He hadn't defended me. He'd started the fight, and I'd gotten suspended for trying to break it up. My parents, of course, had taken his side. Don't, I warned, my voice low. Don't you dare try to use our childhood to guilt me now. You weren't thinking about our childhood when you and mom and dad decided to sell my house out from under me. It's for my business, he insisted, his voice rising again. This is going to make us all rich, like the gourmet dog food company, or the app for rating public restrooms, or the import export scheme that ended with you owing thousands to a supplier in another country. I listed them off, each one a fresh sting. I'm done funding your failures, Benson. And I'm done being the family doormat. Patricia started to cry, loud, theatrical sobs. You're tearing this family apart. After everything we've done for you, what you've done is sacrifice my security for his comfort your entire lives, I said, gesturing from my mother to my brother. And you think this eviction notice is the worst I can do? You have no idea. I haven't even started exposing the full extent of your favoritism or what Benson has really been up to. Benson's face went pale. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in his eyes. I turned and walked back to the kitchen, their shouts and accusations following me. I felt drained, but also strangely powerful. The first domino had fallen. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee now cold, and my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short, but it made the hair on my arms stand up. I know what he did last year. You deserve to know, too. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stared at the text. I typed back a simple, cautious reply. Who is this? The response was almost immediate. My name is Sabrina Foster. I dated Benson for 8 months last year. Can we meet? I have things you need to see. Sabrina. I remembered her. She was smart, ambitious, and way too good for my brother. Their breakup had been sudden and messy, with Benson painting her as unstable and demanding. Of course he did. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. She was already there when I arrived, huddled in a corner booth, nursing a cup of tea. She looked tired, the confident woman I'd met a year ago now shadowed by a weary tension. Thank you for meeting me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure you'd come. When you get a text like that the same day you serve your family an eviction notice, you make time, I replied, sitting down. A flicker of a smile touched her lips. I heard about that. Good for you. She took a deep breath and slid a small USB drive across the table. He ruined me, Tamara, not just emotionally, financially. He convinced me and my business partner to invest in his last venture, a boutique marketing firm. He said he had other investors lined up, showed us projections, the whole 9 yards. It was all a lie. The USB drive contained everything. Scanned copies of fake investor agreements he'd created to lure them in, emails where he detailed his plans to dissolve the company and absorb the capital, voicemails from him, sweet talking her partner while simultaneously telling Sabrina a different story. The final blow was a series of bank statements showing a transfer of $75,000, their entire seed money, from the joint business account into Benson's personal offshore account just days before he declared the venture a failure. He told us the market turned, Sabrina said, her voice thick with disgust. He told me you were the reason he couldn't get more family funding, that you were selfish and holding the family back, all while he was wiring our money to the Caymans. The story clicked into place with sickening clarity. This was why he needed the house sold so desperately. He wasn't funding a new venture, he was trying to pay back or cover up the last one before Sabrina's ex partner filed charges. My mind spun back to a hot summer afternoon when I was 10. I smelled smoke and ran to the backyard to find a patch of dry grass near our wooden fence smoldering. Benson, then 8, stood nearby, a book of matches in his hand, his eyes wide with fear. When my parents came running out, he immediately pointed to the neighbor's fence and started sobbing, claiming he saw their son throw something over. My parents, without a second of hesitation, believed him. They stormed next door, screamed at our neighbors, and threatened to call the police. They never once questioned their perfect son. I was the one who quietly put the fire out with the garden hose while they were busy defending the boy who started it. It was the same pattern, just with more zeros at the end. That evening, I took the USB drive to Nicole. She plugged it into her laptop, her expression growing grimmer with each file she opened. "This is wire fraud," she said, her voice sharp. "Felony level stuff. This isn't just ammunition, Tamara. This is a nuclear bomb. If he tries to fight you on the deed, we can use this to prove a pattern of deceit and financial desperation. It completely destroys his credibility." She helped me compile everything: the deed, 12 years of mortgage statements I'd paid, property tax receipts, and now a folder on my laptop labeled Benson's Bomb. "They're going to get desperate," Nicole warned as I was leaving her office. "Your father is weak and your mother is a cornered animal. They'll feel entitled to that house and everything in it. Protect your evidence. Protect yourself." Her words echoed in my head as I drove home. The house felt different now, no longer a sanctuary, but a battleground. The first thing I did was install a small, motion activated security camera in my office, pointed directly at the safe under my desk. It was discreet, barely noticeable among the books on the shelf. For 2 days, the house was eerily silent. My parents were either staying in their room or avoiding me entirely. Then, late Thursday night, long after the house had gone dark, my phone buzzed with a notification. "Motion detected in office." I held my breath, pulling up the live feed. The image was grainy, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the window. A figure was creeping into the room. It was my father. I watched, my heart pounding, as he knelt down and began fumbling with the dial on my safe, his hands shaking as he tried to force it open. He was trying to steal the deed. He was trying to steal my proof. And I had him on camera. I saved the video file and slept more soundly than I had in a week. The next morning, I found my mother in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee with the hollowed out expression of someone who knew they were losing. My father was nowhere to be seen. I didn't say a word. I just placed my phone on the kitchen island between us and pressed play. The grainy, night vision footage filled the screen. My father on his hands and knees, furtively trying to crack my safe. The sound of his frustrated grunts and the metallic scrape of the dial were perfectly clear. My mother watched, her face turning ashen. When the video ended, she slowly raised her eyes to meet mine. There was no anger left, only a brittle, shattered pride. "He was just confused," she whispered, the excuse so flimsy it was insulting. "He's under a lot of stress." "He was trying to steal from me, Mom," I said, my voice flat. "He was trying to steal the one thing that gives me any power in this house, a house I own." That's when the tears started. Not the furious, theatrical sobs from before, but quiet, defeated tears that streamed down her face. "You're tearing this family apart, Tamara," she choked out, repeating her favorite line. "Look what you're doing to us." This time I didn't let it slide. "No," I said, my voice rising with a decade of suppressed frustration. "I'm not the one doing this. I'm just telling the truth. You're the ones who built this family on lies. You lied about your finances for years. You lied about Benson's ventures. You lied about the deed being a formality. You lied to yourselves, thinking you could just take and take from me forever without any consequences. The lies are what's tearing this family apart, not the truth." She had no answer. She just sat there and cried, a woman shipwrecked by her own choices. Later that day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Tamara?" a woman's voice asked. "It is. Who's this?" "It's your cousin, Victoria. I know we haven't spoken in years, but my mom heard through the grapevine what's going on. I wanted to say I'm on your side." Victoria. We'd been close as kids, but our family had ostracized her and her parents nearly 15 years ago. The official story was a vague disagreement over an inheritance, but I always suspected there was more to it. "Why are you calling, Victoria?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because the same thing happened to my dad," she said, her voice tight with old anger. "It was Benson even back then. He was 18. He borrowed my dad's classic car for a joyride, crashed it, and then told everyone my dad had been drinking and driving. Uncle Emerson and Aunt Patricia backed him up, of course. They paid my dad for the damages to keep him quiet, but they also cut him out of the family for making trouble. They chose Benson's lie over their own brother. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place, another life damaged by their blind devotion to my brother. Victoria offered to provide a written statement about the incident, another testament to Benson's character and my parents' history of covering for him. The cracks in my parents' united front began to show. I could hear them arguing behind their closed bedroom door. Their voices were muffled, but the tone was unmistakable, my father's defensive mumbles and my mother's sharp, accusatory hisses. "You always let him get away with everything," I heard her cry out once. "You made him this way." And his response, "Me? You're the one who always had to have her perfect son." They were turning on each other, the blame shifting like sand. The foundation of their marriage, built on the shared project of enabling Benson, was crumbling now that the project had failed. The breaking point came a week later. I was in the kitchen when a courier delivered a thick envelope addressed to me. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. Inside was a formal notice. Benson, with the financial backing of my parents, was filing a countersuit. He was claiming that the transfer of the deed 12 years ago was done under duress and emotional manipulation. He was arguing that I, a 23-year-old at the time, had coerced my desperate middle aged parents into signing away their home. He was officially taking me to court. The weeks leading up to the hearing were a blur of legal strategy sessions with Nicole and sleepless nights in a house that felt more like a prison than a home. I moved through the hallways like a ghost, my parents and I communicating only through the sterile medium of our lawyers. The day of the hearing, I put on a gray suit that felt like armor and met Nicole at the courthouse. The courtroom was small and suffocatingly quiet. My parents sat at the opposing table with their lawyer, looking smaller and older under the fluorescent lights. Benson sat beside them, dressed in a suit that was a size too tight, trying to project an image of a wronged entrepreneur. He couldn't quite hide the desperation in his eyes. Benson was the first to take the stand. He spun a tale of a loving family in crisis, manipulated by their shrewd and calculating daughter. He claimed I'd used their fear of homelessness to seize their greatest asset. "We were terrified," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And my sister, she saw an opportunity. She made us feel like she was our only hope, that signing the house over was the only way." When it was Nicole's turn, she approached him with a calm, lethal precision. "Mr. Sutton," she began, using his surname in the formal setting, "you claim your parents were under duress. But wasn't it your father's failed investments that put them in that position?" "That's not relevant," he stammered. "And 12 years later," Nicole continued, ignoring him, "you were again in need of capital, this time for a coffee subscription business, correct? After your marketing firm failed and your investors lost $75,000? Benson's lawyer shot up. "Objection, Your Honor." "Sustained," the judge said, but the damage was done. Nicole had painted a clear picture of a man with a pattern of financial failure, desperate for another bailout. As Nicole questioned him, my mind flashed back to that night. I wasn't a calculating predator. I was a 23-year-old kid watching my parents' world collapse. I remember my mother's hands, cold and trembling, as she pushed the pen at me. "Please, Tamara," she'd begged. "You're our only hope." The lie he was telling now was so profound, it felt like it could swallow the truth whole. My father's testimony was a disaster. He stumbled over dates and details, constantly looking to my mother for confirmation. He couldn't explain why, if the transfer was so traumatic, they had never once tried to reverse it in 12 years. My mother was next. She tried to play the part of the heartbroken matriarch, betrayed by her own child. She spoke of her love for both her children equally, her desire to see them both succeed. Then Nicole called her final witness, Sabrina Foster. Sabrina walked to the stand with a quiet confidence. She calmly detailed Benson's fraud, providing bank statements and emails that Nicole entered into evidence. Benson stared at her, his face pale with shock and fury. But the final blow wasn't for him. It was for my mother. "Miss Foster," Nicole said, her voice gentle, During your relationship with Benson, did you ever communicate with his mother, Patricia? Yes, occasionally via text, Sabrina confirmed. And did she ever discuss Tamara with you? Yes. After Benson's marketing firm collapsed, he was pressuring his parents to sell the house. I texted Patricia to ask if Tamara was okay with that. I was concerned for her. And what was her response? Nicole asked. Sabrina took a breath and looked at a printout of the text exchange. She wrote, Tamara will do what's best for the family. She's always been useful, but at the end of the day, she's disposable. A collective gasp went through the small courtroom. I felt the air leave my lungs. Useful, but disposable. The two words that defined my entire existence in their lives. I looked over at my mother. Her face had crumpled, the mask of the grieving victim finally shattered, revealing the cold, pragmatic user underneath. The judge's ruling came quickly. He dismissed Benson's claim, citing a complete lack of evidence for duress and an overwhelming pattern of financial irresponsibility on the part of the plaintiffs. He upheld my ownership of the house, his voice echoing in the silent room. I had won. It was over. But as I stood outside the courtroom, watching my family huddle together, defeated and broken, I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. There was no surge of victory, no sweet taste of revenge. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness. I had won the battle, but standing there, I began to wonder if justice and peace were ever going to overlap. The judge's gavel felt less like a victory and more like a starting pistol for the final, most painful lap. The court upheld my ownership and, by extension, the eviction notice. The final date was set for the end of the week. There would be no more extensions, no more appeals. Nicole arranged for a sheriff's deputy to be present on the day, not because I feared violence, but to ensure the finality of it all, to make it clear that this was no longer a family dispute, but the enforcement of a court order. The morning they were to leave, the house was thick with a tense, miserable silence. Movers hired by my parents tramped in and out, their cheerful professionalism a jarring contrast to the funereal atmosphere. My parents moved like ghosts in their own home, packing the remnants of their 40-year life into cardboard boxes. My father didn't look at me once. He focused on wrapping fragile items with a slow, deliberate care that seemed to absorb all his attention. He looked frail, a man hollowed out by his own weakness. My mother, on the other hand, looked at nothing but me. Every time I entered a room, her eyes would find mine, her gaze a potent mixture of hatred and wounded pride. She didn't speak, but her stare said everything. Look what you've done! Benson was nowhere to be seen. He hadn't been home since the court hearing. I got a call from Nicole midway through the morning. Just got a tip from a colleague in the DA's office, she said, her voice crisp. Sabrina's ex partner officially pressed charges. They issued a warrant for Benson's arrest this morning on charges of wire fraud. Is he gone? Nicole finished. His car was spotted at the airport last night. He bought a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. He ran Tamara. Of course he did. I felt a bitter wave of something that wasn't quite relief. He had escaped again, leaving my parents to face the wreckage he'd caused. By late afternoon, the house was nearly empty. The moving truck was full. The deputy stood by the front door, his presence a silent, uniformed period at the end of a long sentence. My father picked up his suitcase and walked out without a word, not even a glance back. My mother was the last one to leave. She stood in the empty living room, her purse clutched in her hand. The indentations in the carpet where the sofa and chairs had sat for decades were like scars. I hope you're happy, she said, her voice brittle. It was the first thing she'd said to me all day. I'm not, I replied honestly. But this was necessary. She gave a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. You were always so dramatic. She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. I watched through the window as she got into my father's car. They drove away without looking back. And then silence. The silence they left behind was louder than any of their arguments. It echoed off the bare walls and unadorned floors. I was alone in my house. My victory felt vast and empty. I walked through the rooms, each one a chapter of a book I had just finished. The living room where we'd opened Christmas presents, the kitchen where my mother taught me to bake, Benson's old room, which still smelled faintly of old cologne and new schemes. I remembered the laughter, the arguments, the mundane moments of a life that now felt like it belonged to someone else, all of it overwritten by the final, ugly truth. I felt numb, scoured clean of feeling. Finally, I went into my parents' bedroom. The movers had taken the furniture, but the air still held the scent of my mother's perfume and my father's cedar shoe trees. It was the room I was least allowed in as a child, the heart of their private world. Sitting on the windowsill, catching the last of the afternoon light, was a single white envelope. My name was written on the front in my mother's elegant, looping script. It was time to be found, a final, calculated message, a letter left behind. My fingers felt strangely clumsy as I opened the envelope. The letter inside was 2 pages, written in my mother's perfect cursive. I sat on the floor in the empty room and read. It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was a tapestry of justifications woven with threads of self pity. She wrote about the sacrifices she'd made, the dreams she'd given up for her family. She wrote about Benson, not as a con man, but as a boy with a brilliant mind who was just too sensitive for the world. His failures were never his fault. They were the fault of bad partners, bad luck, a world that didn't appreciate his vision. My role in her narrative was that of the sturdy, unspecial child. You were always so capable, Tamara, she wrote. We never had to worry about you, so we focused on the one who needed us more. A mother's love isn't about being fair, it's about giving what is needed. There was a single sentence that came close to remorse. I never intended to hurt you, but I see now that we took your strength for granted. It was followed immediately by a line that soured it completely. I hope one day you'll understand the difficult choices a parent has to make. I read it twice, searching for the words I needed to hear, the acknowledgement of the pain, the simple admission that they were wrong. They weren't there. It was the letter of a woman who was sorry she got caught, not sorry for what she did. I folded the pages and put them back in the envelope. It wasn't the closure I wanted, but I realized it was the only closure she was capable of giving, and maybe that had to be enough. A few days later, I met Victoria for coffee. It felt strange and wonderful to sit across from her, a piece of my past that was suddenly part of my future. We didn't dwell on our family's broken history. Instead, we talked about our jobs, our friends, the silly things we did as kids. It was easy, normal. It was a connection built on mutual respect, not on obligation or guilt. So, what are you going to do with the house? She asked, stirring her latte. It's a lot of space for one person. I know, I said. It was a question Nicole had been asking me, too. She'd urged me to sell it, to take the money and start completely fresh somewhere else. For a while, that's what I thought I would do. But walking through those empty rooms, I'd felt something shift. I'm not selling it, I told Victoria, and I'm not going to live there either. I explained my plan, the idea that had been taking shape in the quiet of the empty house. I'd been in touch with a local nonprofit that helped women fleeing domestic abuse and difficult situations. They were always desperate for safe, transitional housing, a place where someone could land for a few months, catch their breath, and figure out their next steps. The house was perfect. It was large, it was in a safe neighborhood, and it was paid off. Victoria's eyes widened. Tamara, that's amazing. It feels right, I said, and the words were truer than anything I'd said in years. My whole life, that house was a symbol of my family's dysfunction. It was the place where I was overlooked, where my brother's needs always came first. They wanted to turn it into cash to fuel his selfishness. I'm going to turn it into a sanctuary for people who have none. I didn't burn the house down. I reclaimed it. I turned their selfishness into someone's sanctuary. The legal work was straightforward. Nicole handled the contracts with the nonprofit, her usual ferocity now channeled into something deeply constructive. There would be a new kind of life in those old rooms, a new kind of hope. The house would finally be a home in the truest sense of the word, just not for me. I found a small apartment for myself across town, a place with no history, no ghosts in the hallways. It was mine, and mine alone. I don't know what happened to my parents. I assume they found a place to live, funded by whatever was left of their savings. I don't know where Benson is, and I don't care to find out. The ties that bound us weren't severed cleanly. They were rotted through, and they finally just fell away. Sometimes I think about my mother's letter. She believed love was about giving the most to the one who demanded it. I've learned that love is about respect. Justice isn't always about winning in court. Sometimes it's about taking a broken thing and making it whole again, in your own way. If karma knocks gently, revenge kicks down the door.